will show up. I failed to print my agenda. Oh, goodness.
At 6:30 p.m., I'm going to call the meeting to order. And Renee, if I can please have a roll call.
Mr. Brewer,
Here.
Mr. McDaniel,
Here.
Ms. McCowan,
Here.
Mr. Parker,
Here.
Ms. Byrd,
Here.
Mr. McClure. Here. Mr. Griffith,
Here.
Ms. Kendall, Mr. Jablonski.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. We have a lot of guests tonight. Just a decorum note for what to expect. There is a cart in the back of the room which has some half-sheet tan pieces of paper. If you'd like to speak for any of the items, if you will please fill out that sheet, including which item that you would like to speak on. There is a copy of the agenda on that cart as well. And then if you want to bring those up to us, then we'll put these in the stack and we'll call everybody up to the microphone as the time comes up, so everyone knows what to expect and when that will happen. As we go to that item, we will ask for a staff presentation. The Planning Commission will have questions for the staff, then the applicant will present, and then we'll have questions of the applicant, and then we'll move to audience comments. I like to give everybody 3 minutes to speak. If anybody would like a 30-second warning before their 3 minutes is up, let me know. Otherwise, I will yield the full amount of time to you and then thank you for your comments at the end of the 3 minutes. From past experience, that time can feel to go very fast. So that's why the warning can be helpful for some people, but I don't want to interrupt if it would derail someone. Moving on, I'm just going to go to our consent items, starting with item number 1, consideration, approval, or rejection, amendment, and/or postponement of the minutes of the March 9th, 2023 regular Planning Commission meeting. And item number 2, consideration of approval, acceptance, rejection, amendment, and/or postponement of SFP 2223-2, consideration of a short form plat submitted by David Armstrong Delta Surveying Co. for the Cary Edition for 1.905 acres of property generally located at the southeast corner of Imhoff Road and Classen Boulevard. Does any member of the commission wish to remove any item from the consent docket? I make a note that item number 2 had a request for a postponement. Would any member like to remove item number 2 for postponement from the consent docket?
I make a motion, we remove item number 2 from the consent docket for postponement.
And is there a second?
A second.
And a vote?
You may vote. Everyone has voted, and the motion carried 9-0.
Thank you. Does any member of the commission wish to remove any remaining items from the consent docket, or any member of the audience wish to remove any other remaining item, being item number 1, consideration of approval, rejection, amendment, and/or postponement of the minutes of the March 9th, 2023 regular Planning Commission meeting from the consent docket? Okay, seeing none, I would take a motion for item number 1 for the consent docket.
I'd like to make a motion.
And that would be a motion to approve. Okay,
Correct.
I'll second it.
and a vote.
You may vote. Everyone has voted, and the motion to adopt the consent docket carried 9-0.
Moving to non-consent items. Item number 2, consideration of approval, acceptance, rejection, amendment, and/or postponement of SFP 2223-2, consideration of the short form plat submitted by David Armstrong Delta Surveying Co. for the Cary Edition for 1.905 acres of property generally located at the southeast corner of Imhoff Road and Classen Boulevard. We removed it from the consent docket. We didn't postpone it. Yeah, no but we just voted to remove it from the consent docket. We need a vote to postpone. Nope, we removed it from the consent docket. Was the vote.
Okay.
Just for a point of order, just clarifying, our first motion was to remove item number 2 from the consent docket, so it would become a non-consent item so that we could vote on it as a postponement. Is that correct from your understanding of your motion, Commissioner Daniels? We were voting to remove the item from the consent docket so that we could vote on it as a postponement. Was that the understanding of your motion?
I believe my motion was for the minutes.
I believe McCowan
Yeah.
made the motion that I seconded, that
thank
we
you.
removed.
Yes.
And my understanding was yours. We removed it from the consent docket.
Thank
Yes,
you.
That is my understanding.
Okay, so we are now hearing this item as a non-consent item, and we have received a postponement request letter. Is there any additional staff presentation, applicant presentation, or questions for staff or applicant that we'd like to address or audience comment on that item before we take a motion for it? Okay, seeing none, I would take a motion for item number 2 and the applicant's requested postponement.
I will make a motion for postponement.
I second
second.
that motion for postponement.
And a vote.
You may vote.
Thank you, everyone, for bearing with us on that.
Everyone has voted and to 0.
Moving to the next item, items number 3 and 4. Item number 3, consideration of approval, acceptance, rejection, amendment, and/or postponement of resolution number R-2223-109, Plant Life LLC requests amendment of the Norman Land Use and Transportation Plan to remove Special Planning Area 1, SPA 1, retaining commercial designation for 0.53 acres of property located at 2516 Briggs Street. And item number 4, consideration of approval, acceptance, rejection, amendment, and/or postponement of ordinance number O-2223-28, Plant Life LLC requests rezoning from R1 Single Family Dwelling District to C2 General Commercial District for 0.53 acres of property located at 2516 Briggs Street. And I would take the staff presentation.
Colton Wayman with the Planning Department. We have an application from Plant Life LLC to amend the Norman 2025 Land Use Plan to remove the Special Planning Area 1, and retain the commercial designation. And this is located at 2516 Briggs Street. This is the land use plan in this area. The area is predominantly commercial currently. And then notably, the special planning area, which goes from I-35 to 24th Avenue Southwest, from Briggs Street all the way down to where the Thunderbird Lodge property is. And the applicant is requesting to remove that property from the special planning area. The special planning area is a requirement that consolidation of all the properties in special planning area 1 have to be under one unified ownership before this area can redevelop. And in addition to that, Plant Life is also requesting to rezone from R1 Single Family Dwelling District to C2 General Commercial District. This is the existing zoning map. The property, as mentioned, is R1 currently. To the immediate south and east, it's zoned R1. Moving out from there, properties are zoned C2. Along 24th Avenue Southwest, properties are zoned I1, PUD, and C2 as well. This is an existing land use map. The property is currently vacant. Directly to the south, the property is vacant. Directly to the east, there are single-family homes that exist. I will note to the north, there are commercial, but this map is a little outdated. Sooner Legends Hotel actually has been demoed, so that is a giant vacant lot currently. This is an aerial of the site. It's vacant, as mentioned. To the south is vacant, to the east, that single-family house. And then, of course, to the north is that vacant parcel that was Sooner Legends Hotel. This is looking at the property from Briggs Street. This is looking east on Briggs Street. This is looking west on Briggs Street. At the end of that street is where the property is. And this is the proposed site plan. The applicant is proposing a 50-foot by 65-foot building to be used for storage for his landscaping business, in addition to adding a 30-foot by 45-foot pad for access to the site. Staff forwards this request for rezoning as ordinance number 2223-28 for consideration by the Planning Commission and a recommendation to City Council. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Any questions for staff?
I have a question.
Sure.
Why was there a requirement in this special, what was it, a special planning area?
Yeah.
To have all the properties bought up by one owner before development?
I don't know the logic behind that. That was adopted with the Norman 2025 plan back in the early 2000s.
Any other questions for staff? Seeing none, we'd take the applicant presentation. Thank you.
The applicant does not have a presentation, I will note, but he is here to answer questions.
Are there any questions for the applicant?
I do have one. The aerial picture shows a lot of green space, and I would assume with plant being in the name of your business, that beyond the construction, you noted that once it's commercial, you don't have plans to get rid of the green and the grass. I don't know who I'm directing this to. Yes,
Yeah, do you mind coming up to the microphone?
thank you.
And if you will state your name. That's okay. If you will state your name and address when you come up as well.
Yeah, it's Stephen Lewis, 501 Manor Hill Court. This one? Okay. Stephen Lewis, 501 Manor Hill Court. Basically what you see on the site plan, the 50 by 65, that is going to be the only, I want to say concreted stale area. Everything else, because I like to make things look pretty, is going to be more landscape driven, not a nursery. Nothing like that. It's just
Okay.
basically, hey, we're just using the site to store inside, but we're going to actually do a tree line in the front of that because there's no trees there now, so that's it.
All right, thank you very much.
Yeah, for sure.
I've got, before you sit down, it's just all inside storage, you're not
That's
storing
correct.
any equipment or anything else back there?
That's correct, yeah.
Okay,
So we exclusively work out of Norman.
yeah,
I basically, like I said, I don't even leave Norman for most of my business, unless I go pick up stuff. But it's just a central place for us, so we can, we're working out of Goldsby now. We're just,
yeah, I was just wondering if you were using
Sure.
it as a shop yard or anything like that?
no, nothing like that.
All right.
No, like I said, I like to make stuff look pretty for a reason, and it's gonna be kind of geared that way.
Yep.
That makes sense, so.
I have a question for you. In part of your rezoning process, I'm not sure if you worked with staff on some of your options. I'm just curious for your selection to request rezoning to C2 instead of maybe like a planned unit development that would be more specific to your specific use. Because if you weren't aware, after you acquire this and rezone it, it can be used for any purpose in the C2 if it's just rezoned flatly.
We were aware of that, but when we were submitting the paperwork, a lot of that kind of got brought to light as we were submitting the paperwork, and we're like, we're here. I think we spoke. We're here, and we've got the paperwork. We're ready for it. We kind of are spelling out what we're doing with the property. I understand if someone comes in and wants to do something different with it. It is very locked to the interstate. There's I think maybe 5 feet, maybe of space between us and the interstate as it is. If someone were to come in and maybe purchase everything, they're probably going to buy everybody out that's in that area. Being honest with you, our plan is just to operate out of there, not to sell it. And I don't think City of Norman offers sewage to it either. So I think that would actually come into play with anyone who was going to try to buy the property, because you have to have basically a septic or something to that nature. I hope I'm answering your question right, but
Thank you.
yeah.
Any other questions for the applicant? Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Are there any audience comments for this item? Okay, seeing none, I would move to Planning Commission discussion.
I'll make a comment. I think this use is fine. As far as rezoning to C2, I do think it opens it up for potential future concerns, given that it's abutting the highway right there. I generally agree that for future real estate use on septic, that there's not going to be much of an issue. You're going to have either someone come in and buy a swath or use it for a similar purpose in the future if it does sell. So that's just my take on it.
Thank you. Any other discussion? I would second that. I think the proposed use appears to be in line with what is there. We can't control what could happen in the future, but I do think it's nice to see something that had been an otherwise underutilized vacant piece of land have some use along the highway that can be potentially a challenging piece of property to develop. So I don't see any issues with the intended use as of now, only concerns being general opening of what could happen. But I think the limiting factors, as the applicant said, are worth noting. Okay. If there's not any other discussion, I would take a motion on this item
I'll move to approve.
I'll second.
and a vote.
You may vote. Everyone has voted, and the motion carried 9-0.
Moving to our next item, items number 5 and 6, consideration of approval, acceptance, rejection, amendment, and/or postponement of ordinance number O-2223-29, CA McCarty Construction LLC request rezoning from R1 Single Family Dwelling District to SPUD Simple Planned Unit Development for 1.04 acres of property located at 1309 South Berry Road. And item number 6, consideration of approval, acceptance, rejection, amendment, and/or postponement of PP-2223-6, consideration of a preliminary plat submitted by CA McCarty Construction LLC, ARC Engineering Consultants LLC, for McCoop Abode Addition for 1.04 acres of property located at 1309 South Berry Road. And I'll take the staff presentation.
Melissa Navarro with the Planning Department. We have an application from CA McCarty Construction LLC for a rezoning R1 single family dwelling to a SPUD simple plan unit development, and a consideration of a preliminary plat for a McCoop Abode Addition for the property located on 1309 South Berry Road. The existing zoning is R1 single family dwelling, as well as the surrounding properties on the north, south, and west, and there is a flood hazard zone on the east. The existing land use is low-density residential, as well as the properties on the north, south, and west, and there is a floodway on the east. This is an aerial of the property. It is vacant, has no structures on it. This is a street view of the property. This is across the street. This is Rebecca Lane over there on the right. This one is Southbury Road, looking to the north. And this one is looking to the south. This one is the preliminary plat. And this one is the preliminary site plan. The applicant is requesting to rezone the property from existing R1 single-family dwelling to a spot simple plat unit development to be able to split the lot and develop 2 single-family residential lots. Staff forwards this rezoning request as O-2223-29 for consideration by the Planning Commission. I'm happy to answer any question.
Thank you. Any questions for staff? Seeing none, I take the applicant presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Commissioners. Gunnar Joyce with Rieger Law Group on behalf of the applicant. We also have Curtis McCarty with CA McCarty Construction and Steve Rollins with ARC Engineering, who's the engineer here tonight as well. So we're just east of Berry Road, and as you can see, south of Lindsay Street, we've got a 1.04 acre lot. And really the goal tonight is a spud that gets us really close to R1 standards. It's not so much increased density, it's really creative layout. R1 allows for minimum of 6,000 square foot lots, and we are proposing a half acre and a 0.49 acre lot, so we are well in excess of the minimum R1 lot. There's the existing site. Real quick, the legalities of it. No change to the comp plan. 2025 low density residential is still the same. We still fit within that. And then as you can see, instead of the R1, we're going to do a spud here that really allows for kind of a creative layout. And so mainly the two proposals here is this is the boundary of the northern lot, and it goes up here about 37 feet. The R1 standard for frontage on public roadways is 50 feet, so there's one reduction of our proposal. And then there are 2 spots where we've requested smaller side yard setbacks from the 3 feet, from 5 feet R1 standard to 3 feet up in this area and down in this area, I believe. So really that's the only variance from R1. Everything else is going to be compliant. This is the mock-up site plan. You see one single family house here, one single family house here. Both show allowances for pool and pool houses. They're going to share a driveway, which is going to keep access on Berry to one curb cut like exists currently and historically. Here's the other item tonight's the preliminary plats. As you can see, it's 2 lots, one being in the northern 1.51 acres, the southern 1.49 acres. And there's the site plan in context when it's laid out. Just a quick summary. Again, essentially, all the verbiage on the side of the screen there says that we are complying with R1 standards. That's still the same drainage allowances for R1. We're still committed to 65% maximum impervious, just like R1 across the board. Same landscaping requirements. It's just the side yard and the small reduction from public frontage. There will be an extension of the existing sidewalk along South Berry Road with this preliminary plat. The staff report does note, staff recommends approval of the preliminary plat. There was a transportation impacts report attached that recommended approval and noted there were no anticipated traffic issues with this request. The staff report notes that there are additional high-density uses in the area, and we are, again, well within the density of R1, being 6,000 minimum lot size. There was a pre-development meeting on this, and a couple neighbors showed up kind of concerned about the request to potentially increase density in the area, but after meeting with Curtis, a lot of those concerns, probably all those concerns were eased, and the staff report notes that as well, that meeting went really well. So with that, I'll take any questions.
Thank you. Any questions for the applicant?
This is interesting. What do you do, I mean, just out of curiosity with the driveway, is it shared or?
Yeah, there'll be a shared access easement basically filed along with the plat.
Would you like to speak to the difference of platting this versus a lot split with that shared access?
So my understanding is that we are required to plat here.
I would believe you would have to do a plat here because, unless I'm mistaken, the city would require the access be directly abutting a public road. So this layout would not have been able to work without a plat in a lot split. So by platting it, you actually have created two lots with this, and it's a good way to solve that problem, in a way that's functional. But that might be why, to do this layout, they're coming to us for a plat rather than seeking a lot split.
And I'm not sure, Jane, you might know, I don't even know if we have that allowance. I think we can go the other way and take multiple down to one, but I don't think we're allowed to take one into two without platting in order.
Yeah, thank you.
I think the applicant wishes we could, because it might have been quicker.
All right. Any other questions for the applicant? Okay. I don't see any. Any audience comments on this item? Seeing none, Planning Commission discussion.
I was just going to say, if this is hinging on the frontage width based upon the layout, I don't see any issues with it. I think it's kind of cool.
I agree. I think it looks good. An initial concern I had was that's a lot of driveway. But if you reconfigured it, it's the same length as two driveways if you had the house set back. So I think it looks good.
Yeah, I think it's a real creative use to get two units on this site that typically would be one. And I share a driveway with my neighbor. We work it out, so.
I am personally very favorable of this, and my family, including myself, drive by this site every single day, and I will hold Curtis responsible if it doesn't look good afterwards. So, and I feel comfortable with this item, especially when you actually can see on the aerial the size of these lots compared to neighboring lots in the area. You can really get the gravity of how large these lots will be, and I think they'll be very tastefully done and still look nice and fit in with the area. If there's any other discussion? Seeing none, I would take a motion.
I make a motion to approve.
And a vote.
You may vote. Everyone has voted. Carried 9-0.
Moving on to item number 7, consideration of approval, acceptance, rejection, amendment, and/or postponement of ordinance number O-2223-30. J. Ford LLC requests amendment of the CCPUD approved in O-2021-23 for 0.16 acres of property generally located at 231 West Main Street to allow for specific tenant signage and for more efficient drainage. Due to a conflict with this item, as I have a personal interest in the neighboring property, which is going to be part of the drainage, I would like to request to recuse, if someone wouldn't mind making that motion.
I make a motion to allow Commissioner Byrd to recuse herself from this item.
I'll second.
And a vote?
You may vote. Everyone has voted, and the motion carried 9-0.
Okay, so we'll go ahead and pick up with that item, and staff have a presentation.
Yes. Do I need to forward it, or, okay, there it is. Okay. Good evening. Anna E. Starr with the Planning Department, and this is a request from J. Ford LLC for an amendment of an existing CCPUD 0-2021-23 to allow for additional signage and to modify the landscaping. Here is the subject tract, and the existing zoning for that is CCPUD, as stated, and to the east is a CCPUD, And then to the north, west, and south is Center City form-based code zoning. And then here's the existing land use. Currently, this lot has a building, a historic building on the corner, surrounded by a vacant lot. To the east is a commercial office space with Dr. Bird's office in it, and to the south is a commercial building, as well as to the west and the north. And here's that aerial to show you it is indeed still vacant. And there is the existing historic building there on the corner. This is a view from Main Street looking north towards the existing historic structure in the vacant lot. Here's a view from Webster Avenue. And then here's a view from kind of back by the alley looking south towards the lot. And then here's looking down back east towards down Main Street. And then south across Main Street to the southwest across Main Street. And then back north down Webster. This is the view. And again, this applicant is just requesting an amendment to their CCPUD. During their submission of their building permit, it came to light that their signage that they wanted to request did not meet their CCPUD, existing CCPUD, nor did they wish to not install the rain garden that they had originally proposed on the west side of the building, due to limited space and due to the fact that it really wasn't required to meet the city drainage requirements. So they are just requesting to amend for signage and to modify that landscaping. And there will not be any changes to the proposed uses or to the design of the structure. Their signage request is to accommodate 2 tenants they are anticipating, plus future tenants, and so they are requesting to allow for 3 additional anchor tenant signs, each sign to be a maximum of 30 square feet, and to be placed either between the first and second floor, or the second and third floor, or on the awnings. And then they also wish to allow for vinyl window graphics, 25% maximum coverage either for the first floor tenants or the second floor tenants. And then they also wish to allow for 1 temporary grand opening banner sign for each tenant for 30 days per grand opening, maximum 60 square feet. And then the CCPUD narrative that they have submitted outlines these variances. As well, the CCPUD states that there will be 3 planters boxes placed in replacement for the rain garden that they will not be installing. Again, there are no proposed use changes or design changes, only the request for variances for the additional signage and to request to not install the rain garden. There are no pre-development or Greenbelt Commission comments or Park Board comments due to that they're not required for this application. And Public Works did note that stormwater runoff will be diverted to the storm sewer inlet near the corner of Webster and Main Street. And with that, staff forwards this request to the Planning Commission for consideration and recommendation to City Council. And I will take any questions if you have any.
Are there any questions for staff?
I actually have one, just as a curiosity. Who would be responsible for maintaining the planters? Is it the tenant, the developer, or the city? Who would be responsible?
It will not be in the city right away, so it'll be the tenant or the property owners that will be responsible for that.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Point of clarification, you had mentioned that some of the signage could be between first and second, and you said second and third story.
Yes.
Is that basically allowance for if there is a future third story on this building, that would be allowed?
Well, I think their drawing indicates that, I say second and third floor, it's really the second floor ceiling and the third floor ceiling and the second floor roof. That's how it's stated, so that they can put it up there. Normally on CCFBC, you can't put it between the second and the third, but they're asking to be able to do that.
Okay.
Any additional questions for staff? Thank you.
Thank you.
Does the audience, any member of the audience have any comments that they'd like to make about this? Oh, sorry.
There's an applicant, and he has a presentation, I think.
Okay, oh, sorry, Gunner.
All right. Thanks, Anis. This is actually a pretty exciting one. I know that we were back here doing this in 2021, and this was not controversial, but it had a lot of attention because it was going to be one of the first Center City form-based codes mixed use right on Main Street. And so Joey Wishnuck, Matt Peacock, the architect, couldn't be here tonight, but both really excited because when they came through the first time, it was truly kind of a spec building. And now they have recently announced, the reason we're here tonight is they have hatch and sidecar both coming into this building. So very excited to have those tenants. And then those tenants have been involved in the design. They actually were at building permit stage for their spaces, and their required signage that they have at their other locations didn't comply with the Center City form-based code signage requirements. And at the time, we didn't know who the tenants would be, so we just adopted the signage requirements. And so now we're here with very specific layouts that are attached to the Center City PUD. So real quick, you guys have seen it, but it's Webster and Main Street. The legalities, again, it's no change to the 2025 designation, so it's going to be commercial, and the existing zoning CCPUD, two very minor amendments. This is, just for context, in 2021, the approved site plan. Again, you don't see any real specific tenant signs yet. The only one we talked about at that time was the building signage, the J. Ford sign. No change to that approved sign. Something of note is that it was pretty heavily discussed at the time. Councilmember Lee Hall, Ward 4, really wanted to ensure that this would not be a single-story building. And so Joey committed to building in floor joists up here at the ceiling to ensure that he had kind of put in the initial investment in stage 1 to basically guarantee that stage 2, phase 2, the second story was coming. And so with this proposal tonight, again, we're going to guarantee that because sidecar is coming up on the second story. So they're very excited that they're able to deliver that on the first phase of development. This is the signage that we were talking about and adopting into the CCPUD. This is hatch right here on both sides. And then this is sidecar's sign as well. The J. Ford, again, is just attached to the CCPUD because it was the first time. So the additions here are hatch and sidecar. We also have added a third allowance for another anchor tenant signage. There's just spec signage down there, trying to hope that they don't have to come back when they find another one. But basically, it's just allowances for similar signage with sidecar and hatch. The rain garden is, again, when we came the first time, it was speculative on the very north side, and it was very small. When they came into final development, they realized that the rain garden up there was not actually contributing to the site drainage because, if I can go back here, the site has existing infrastructure. I'll actually steal Anis's slide because I don't think I put in a good street view. But right here, there's an existing storm drain that has adequate capacity for this development. So when they went in through the final development phases, they realized the most efficient way to handle drainage here is not to push it to the north, but instead kick it to the south corner where we have that storm drain right at the corner of the site. And so that has been the plan now, is to not hold it to the north, but to take it to the south. No request for any variance of any kind from the existing CCPUD about the drainage requirements. It's just that we had shown a rain garden on the site plan. You're tied to the site plan, so we're eliminating that. In exchange, there is an agreement to have a minimum of 3 planter boxes along Webster. And that is really the entirety of the request. It is essentially signage with that minor cleanup of the planter boxes. The other signage requests, actually really good catches by staff. The vinyl window graphics are something that's not allowed under City form-based code, but it's pretty common in commercial development. And same with the grand opening banners. It's allowed in the city's signage code elsewhere, but not specifically addressed in the Center City Form-Based Code signage section. So we've just added that in. We have pretty much verbatim taken the city standards that apply elsewhere outside of Form-Based Code and put them into this CCPUD. And we also have not received any protests. I will note, we didn't put it on this slide, but going through last time in 2021, Dr. Gabriel Bird wrote a support letter for this project, and this applicant and Dr. Bird have an agreement on a shared dumpster to utilize for these two sites. And so with that, I'll take any questions.
Are there any questions for the applicant?
I have a question. So the proposal says that you'll leave the old brick house alone,
Yep.
barring an act of God.
Right.
But without a major act of man, a minor act of God is going to take that down. I'm just curious, what's the plan? So if and when that falls down, do you all have a plan?
We do. I apologize. That was heavily negotiated the first time, and so in 2021, I would have had that for you off the top of my head, because that was near and dear to Council Member Hall's heart. I believe it says that you have two options, and I think it's in the citing section. I'm trying to find here. Okay, so I don't know if you have the entire
I don't think I do.
document. So this section 2 is all about the existing corner building, and it takes up 2 full pages. And it talks about basically that the repairs can be of like kind materials, and basically we can build it back in that footprint, or we could do an allowance to Center City Form-Based Code, which is the required build lines. And so it was really difficult to try and draft language around that, and the original proposal was to just clear it and build up to the Center City Form-Based Code required build line. But there was a very impassioned movement to keep it. And so to the applicant's credit, they went tirelessly a lot of meetings to ensure that that's protected. And if it is knocked down, they can do that same building again, or if not, they have to comply with Center City Form-Based Code.
Thank you.
Do we have any other questions for the applicant? Seeing none, thank you very much. Okay, now, do we have any members of the audience that would like to comment on this item? Does anybody in the Planning Commission have anything that you want to discuss about it? Okay, so,
Maybe I'll ask a question. Can anyone see a drawback to allowing the signage, between the quote second and third floors? So just at the top of the second floor, because that seems to be really the only change. I don't see a drawback, but I want to make sure that no one else does.
okay, can I request to take a vote?
I'll make a motion to approve.
I'll second.
You may vote. Everyone has voted. Motion carried 8-0.
All right, thank you. I think just in case anybody else has joined since as we've gone through here, just a quick reminder, if anybody would like to make a comment during the section, if you don't mind, please filling out the half sheet, which is a tan piece of paper, this color, on the cart in the back of the room. Put in your name. Essentially, when we open for audience comments, I've got a stack already up here. You can bring them up here if you have not already. I'm going to call you up to the front. When you come up to the microphone, please state your name and your address, and then begin. If anybody would like a 30-second warning before their 3 minutes of time allotted is up, please let me know. Otherwise, I'll yield the full 3 minutes to you. And then at the end of that time, I'll thank you for your comments. And then, we'll just kind of go forward to the next item. Item number 8, consideration of approval, acceptance, rejection, amendment, and/or postponement of ordinance number O-2223-33, Midway Grocery, Inc. requests rezoning from C1 Local Commercial District to SPUD Simple Planned Unit Development for 0.234 acres of property generally located at 601 West Eufaula Street. And I will take the staff presentation.
Colton Wayman with the Planning Department. We have an application from Midway Grocery Incorporated to rezone from C1 Local Commercial District to SPUD Simple Plan Unit Development at 601 West Eufaula Street. This is an existing zoning map. As mentioned, the property is currently zoned C1. That property, the subject tract encompasses a tract just to the north that is also zoned C1. And then immediately outside of that, most of the area is zoned R1. Outside of that is the Center City Form-Based Code area. This is an existing land use map of the site. The predominantly single-family homes surround the Midway Deli. This is an aerial of the site. As mentioned, to the north is that C1 zoned property, but it's actually a single-family home. To the east are single-family homes, and to the west are single-family homes. This is looking at the Midway Deli from Eufaula Street. This is looking east on Eufaula. This is looking south on Chautauqua. And this is looking north on Chautauqua. And then this is looking at the alley that is just north of the property. And then I'll come back to this picture here after reviewing the site plan. The site plan does not propose any changes other than at the very north end, there's a future stage that would be the applicant proposes a temporary stage that would be taken down following an event. And going back to that it's difficult to see, but just behind that tree in that fenced area is where that proposed stage would be. The applicant is proposing to limit the amount of uses that are typically allowed in the C1 zoning district, in addition to allowing for catered events, outdoor catered events. In regard to outdoor catered events, the applicant proposes that amplified sound shall be used no earlier than 12 p.m. and no later than 10 p.m. Staff forwards this request for rezoning as ordinance number O2223-33 for consideration by the Planning Commission and a recommendation to City Council. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Questions for staff?
Oh, excuse me, I actually forgot to go over the protest map.
Oh, thank you.
I apologize. So this is the protest map. So in the notification area, we got roughly 13.9% support, and then 45% protests for the request to rezone.
And just to clarify, is this the most current protest map?
Yes, ma'am, this is. Now I'm happy to answer any questions.
All right, any questions for staff?
I do have a question. So I'm looking at the note about sound and that amplified music should be restricted to not exceed the maximum permissible sound limits under the City of Norman noise ordinance. What are, if you can give examples, like what are examples of what would be a maximum noise ordinance type event going on?
I can't think off the top, I don't know off the top of my head the noise ordinance. So I wouldn't be able to tell you that, I apologize.
Any other questions for staff?
I do have a question. In the event, you said that the stage would be one that they would set up and remove. Would it be under setback requirements or anything like that? Or would they be able to put it right up against neighboring fence lines?
They would be able to put it generally where the site plan proposes it in the PUD, which is just to the far north there, right up next to the alley.
I have a question. Where that future stage is, are they going to have to remove any large trees? Or is it already clear?
I don't believe that they're going to be removing any trees. As you can see on this photo, in the far back is where that stage will go, and there's no trees there currently.
So we're specifically looking at rezoning from C1 to the SPUD. What items in the SPUD are outside of C1 specifically?
The outdoor catered events.
Okay. Will alcohol be served here? Or maybe that's an applicant question.
Yeah, it's not mentioned in the SPUD.
Okay.
But maybe the applicants can speak to that.
It was noted, I believe, in the, at some point in one of the reports that they did have maybe it was in a protest letter, but that they do have an alcohol license. That wouldn't necessarily fall upon Planning Commission as a zoning item, but just as a point of order. I did look at the C1 zoning code, and C1 has an AP restaurant, that a restaurant may include live entertainment and/or a dance floor. All such activity fully within an enclosed building, provided the kitchen remains open with full food service whenever live entertainment is offered. I did not see specifically outdoor same venues, so I believe, and I'll let the applicant speak to this more so for themselves, but really it's the difference of indoor versus outdoor is what I saw as the main reason for the rezoning, so, and the stage, so. Any other questions for staff? Okay, seeing none, I would take the applicant presentation.
Good evening, Commissioners. Hal Ezel on behalf of the applicant, 148th Avenue Northwest, Norman, Oklahoma, 73072 on the address. Oh, it's been a while since I've done this. Where's my presentation?
The other way.
Am I going backwards or forward? Okay, sorry. Technology is not my strong suit. Okay. So, as has been pointed out to you, we are here today on the application of Midway Grocery, Inc. to change from a C1 local commercial district zoning to an SPUD zoning designation. So this is just a brief aerial to put it in a broader neighborhood context of where the property is located. There's Eufaula, there's Chautauqua. Over here you can have Main Street. There is NEDC. I'll explain why that's relevant in just a moment. The current zoning designation is there. Okay, so the current zoning, and I think this is important to note, there's going to be no change in the use on this property with regards to the SPUD designation. There have been and will continue to be outdoor music events. It's just a question of how they're permitted with the city or whether a permit is necessary with the city. If the SPUD is approved, it is not necessary to come and get a variance permit for a specific event. If the SPUD is not approved, then the music events will continue to happen under that application process where you apply for a permit and a variance on the specific event with the city. So I think it's important to understand there's going to be no use change on this property, number one. Number two, there are currently 53 permitted uses in C1 local commercial district. I've just thrown out some here. Automobile parking lots, catering establishment, delicatessen, restaurant, hotel, motel, medical marijuana dispensary, liquor store, office business. If you pull up the ordinance, you'll see all 53 lined out, and those are just, as a matter of right, those don't even get into special uses. A special use that would be permissible on the site would be a funeral home. The property, the SPUD, amounts to what is a significant downzoning on this property. It goes from 53 permitted uses to 5. And I'm going to complain that Colton stole some of my pictures. But so this is looking at the Midway from the front. This bamboo area here is an outdoor patio that has hosted small events in the past before the other area was ready. So, as I just said, this results in a significant downzoning of the property. In addition, it limits the operation of events. If the applicant were to go and apply to the city for just a variance permit on the event, they would be allowed to operate from 7 a.m. to 11 p.m. One of the restrictions put in the SPUD is that the amplified music would only be done between the hours of 12 p.m. and 10 p.m. You've seen this view looking down Eufaula, looking down Chautauqua. This adjoining property to the east of the Midway is also owned by the applicant. It's part of the backyard of this property is what results in the staging area that you'll see momentarily, which is why it's called the backyard. This is a view of the front patio that's off Eufaula and is screened by the bamboo planters. This is another view looking from the north to the south of that same outdoor patio in the front area. This is the side patio that was put in to provide additional seating, and that is on the east side of the building. Then coming off of that side patio, you can now see the area that is set aside for the live outdoor music events. This is the current stage area for those events. This is the view that you, I think, Commissioner McClure were asking about large trees. This is the current view of that site looking in the north. That is the fence and the alley behind the fence. You can see there's this one large tree here. The staging area that you saw, the future staging area, was set forth to be used in this area back here. So I think it's important to understand why we're here tonight. And the reason we're here tonight is beginning in March, April of 2022, the applicant began scheduling and hosting outdoor music events. A dispute developed with one of the neighbors who called the police for 4 consecutive events each time an event was held. I think it's important to note that each of those were thoroughly investigated and there was no violation of the City of Norman noise ordinance from the events that were going on. But that is an intractable situation to have the police called on every single event that you're doing. The applicant reached out and did the City of Norman's mediation program with the homeowner who was calling the police. Unfortunately, there was no satisfaction from that mediation. At that point, the applicant reached out to the city for advice, guidance on how can we best move forward in this process, because we were not wanting to create a burden for the city. We're not wanting to have continuous police calls. We want to develop a resolution to this. The city's suggestion was to go forward with an SPUD, which would allow for, in essence, for the tightening up of the use of the property that would give the applicant the opportunity to address some of the concerns that had been expressed. One of those concerns that was expressed privately to the applicant, and as also came up in the pre-development meetings, is, well, we like Bob, but how do we know what's going to happen after Bob's gone? And one of the other issues that came up that was addressed was I apologize. The SPUD, in addition to controlling, the future use of the property, would give the residents additional protection in limiting the current use of the property and setting forth clear parameters of what could be done and when it could be done on the property in such a manner to try and allay some of the fears of the unknown related to the events. I think there was some degree of concern that are they going to be hosting, raucous Guns N' Roses concerts there every night? And the answer is no. But it is that fear of the unknown. So the SPUD does two things. It tightens up hours, use, and it protects the future use of the property. If your concern is, I want this property to be the Midway, and I always want it to be the Midway, I like the Midway. Well, this is the only thing that guarantees that. The SPUD, with its reduction in permissible uses, is the only thing that protects this property. Right now, Bob can sell the property to me. I could scrape it tomorrow. I can scrape all those trees off of it and put it in a parking lot, and there isn't anyone who can have any say about it. I could put it in a liquor store. There isn't anyone that would have any say about it. If you want to protect this property to preserve its current use, this is the way to do it with the SPUD. And that's what the applicant is trying to do, is offer those protections to the neighborhood and address their concerns as articulated. We went through one pre-development meeting, and at that point, we withdrew the application and went back to the drawing board to try and address those concerns. We worked with the city. We went and did a second pre-development meeting. This SPUD has been through 2 pre-development meeting process. In addition, when I talk about preserving, based on what is set forth in the SPUD, your signage requirements don't change, your lighting doesn't change, the dumpster enclosures don't change, your open space requirement doesn't change. All those items are preserved for the future. The only thing that the SPUD does is, again, it narrows the permissible uses from 53 to 5. It brings in and incorporates, as has been noted previously, that live outdoor music events are permissible. And what that means is that now, if that is approved, the applicant does not have to go to the city, apply for a permit, pay for a permit for each event. Functionally, there is no change. What happens is the neighborhood gets great protections to assure that the Midway is always the Midway, or something close to what it is. One of the things that comes up continuously is parking. So the Midway has, and this is noted in the staff report, 7 parking spaces in front. It is considered to have the equivalent of 40 on-street parking space requirements. And in addition to that, if there ever were an issue or an anticipated issue that went beyond that, and it's noted in the SPUD that the event will, it's not deviating, and I guess this is an important point to make, the SPUD does not ask for any deviation from the City of Norman's sound ordinance or on-street or off-street parking ordinance. It notes that it will not impede emergency vehicles. If for any reason an event thought that might not, we are negotiating right now with, right here, the Norman Chamber of Commerce and Norman Economic Development Coalition to use their parking lot as an overflow parking and being able to run a shuttle back here to the property. So I think it is important to note that literally the only variance is from a catered event standpoint, being able to do those events and provide live music with those events outdoors. This is typical of an event. This is a picture that was taken at an event. The crowd doesn't look too large, too unruly or raucous. This is the stage with the performers on the stage. This picture also evidences one change that has been made in an effort to work with one of the homeowners. It was agreed that these speakers, which were currently in this picture pointed towards the crowd, would be moved and resituated so that they are, oh, there's 3 handsome fellows. Right here, the speakers are now placed back here and over here, pointed back towards the performing stage. What that does is it directs, rather than when the speakers are here pointed out towards the crowd, that sound can carry, and the property that's noted here that is actually zoned commercial but is a residence, the speakers are pointed at that house. So in order to minimize that, now a sound engineer has been consulted, and we have a placement to put a speaker here and a speaker here pointed back towards the stage so that the sound is not being radiated at that occupied property. Also, the effect of that is also the band and their sound engineers turn the sound down a little bit because they don't want reverb coming at them directly while they're on the stage. So that is a concession that has been just operationally made and is already going to be implemented in an effort to work with the neighborhood. The whole point of this process was to work with the neighborhood, protect the residents, address the concerns, and give them some certainty as best you can. Now, you can't write in every little detail because this becomes the zoning ordinance for the property. So it would make no sense on the zoning ordinance of the property to write in specifically where the speakers need to be located. So those sorts of details are not written in, not because the applicant is trying to be evasive, but because it just makes no sense to write that level of micro detail into a zoning ordinance that's covering the subject property. The music at the Midway is something that strengthens the neighborhood. It's a cultural enhancement. It gives the people and the neighbors the opportunity to meet, congregate, get to know each other, talk. It is, in this neighborhood, I want to add, is bigger than the 350-foot radius. It didn't make it into the Planning Commission proposal because it was outside of the 350-foot radius, but there was a petition that was signed by multiple people in support of music at the Midway. And again, any neighborhood is larger than the 350 feet that surrounds the particular property. So there are certainly people who are proponents of this. There are certainly people who are opposed to it. I feel that the applicant, and I hope you see in the process, has done everything that they feel they can reasonably do to accommodate those concerns. But at the end of the day, if you don't like outdoor music and you don't want outdoor music, there's nothing I can do, and there's nothing this SPUD can do that will assuage that concern. So outside of that, I think the applicant has taken reasonable steps. This does downsell the property, it protects it, it puts restrictions, they're not currently in place. And I guess the last thing I would encourage you to remember is that speculation and feelings are not facts. Thank you. I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
I have a couple. What is the size of the current stage?
I'll have to defer to Bob.
And you're proposing to make it 30 by?
Bob, do you want to come up to the microphone to speak? And if you will just state your name and address for the record.
Bob Thompson, 2838 Misty Ridge Drive, Norman, Oklahoma, 73071. The question regarding the future stage was just my effort to be as specific as possible with the SPUD. When we first drew it up, I wanted to leave us an area that we could put a stage in the future. It would be a temporary stage if we used one. But we don't have any specific plans, revolving around that stage. It was my understanding that I needed to be as specific as possible about that kind of thing when I drew up the SPUD. So that's a That's really a speculative future use.
Okay, but it's in it and with the dotted line, and I've asked questions about the stage earlier to the city as well. To me, where you have that dotted line indicates that if it was approved, then you're able to go without any offset or anything, that full 30 by whatever, also going by your reasoning of being as specific as possible, which is why I'm asking questions, because it does look from the drawing like there are plans if you have a bigger stage for a bigger event. And so that's why I'm asking questions about the stages, just to
Sure.
bear in mind if there's current complaint and protest, you know, how this, I don't know, this is the one that I'm viewing.
Yeah.
How that image might be leaving your neighbors feeling uneasy, because I'm feeling a little uneasy. The second question I had was, at one point in the presentation, you said that this decreased and limited the sound from noon to 10, but you said that narrowed it from the 7 to 11. But then later you said it wasn't really asking for a variance from sound. So is the 7 to 11 operating of business on commercial land? What is the cutoff for noise? I just want to understand.
So the.
If you don't mind using the microphone, thank you.
Sorry. So the 7 to 11 relates to the hours that an amplified music event could operate today. If an applicant goes down to the city, applies for a permit and a variance for an event, they can operate that event by right from 7 to 11. The restriction put in the SPUD limits that for an outdoor amplified music event from 12 p.m. to 10 p.m. So it's a reduction in the window of time in which that can operate. So it can't occur outside of the hour. You can't have outdoor amplified music outside of the hours of noon to 10 p.m.
And by operation, does that mean they're actually playing, or does that include the tear down and pack away?
That's playing.
The PUD was written, amplified sound shall be used no earlier than 12 p.m. and no later than 10 p.m. So it was specific to the sound.
Correct. On the 7 to 11 that you were referencing, the operation, because if I'm operating an event and I can't be doing anything with the event after 11, I'm going to start packing up sooner. So I'm trying to understand if it's really the same thing, but defining it specifically as 10.
I do have a copy of the noise variance permit for
Thank you.
the city of Norman. And it says no variant on item number 2 in conditions and guidelines on page 2. No variance for entertainment or recreational purposes shall be permitted earlier than 7 a.m. or later than 11 p.m. Sunday through Thursday and 12 a.m. midnight on Friday and Saturday. And that's, again, no variance for entertainment or recreational purposes. So.
The
Right,
variance
but
is
that-
for sound, that's all, right? It's just the sound.
It is, that part is just for sound. I would say, I don't know, I wouldn't interpret that, but that's how the application is
Okay,
written.
because I'm just trying to differentiate between when sound will end and when activity will end for the residents' concerns.
We've been, in the events that we've been conducting before all of this transpired, we had been running our events from 7 or 7:30 in the evening until 9 o'clock. We had a couple of times last summer when it was very hot and the sun was very bright on the stage at 7 o'clock. And so we pushed that back to 7:30 to give some shade to the stage. And that pushed our event back between 9 and 9:30. What I try to do in selecting 10 o'clock as our parameters is to give myself time to be able to adjust to situations like that and still be more advantageous than the current noise ordinance would be. So we didn't even differentiate between weekends and weekdays as the current ordinance does. So you could say we're giving up 2 hours on the weekend. It's not really a concession on my part. We just don't plan to operate that long. Our events advertised, our events planned going forward are typically from 7 until 9 p.m. And
Thank you.
the extra hour is just, it's just for elasticity.
Can I ask a tangential question?
Sure.
How late can commercial activity take place? So if you didn't have amplified sound, how late could you be running like the
I
restaurant
don't
business
know that
outside?
there's a restriction on my time parameters. Yes, sir.
I actually do have one. In the years that you've been at Midway, and I'm sure many of your neighbors have had your chili as well. On a side note, very, very good. On a music note, has Midway ever been cited for a noise?
No, sir. No,
Thank
sir. We've been operating outdoor events really for 25 years or better. I have had times when the police would come by and say we needed to turn it down. We always complied.
Sure.
It's easy to do. And, but we haven't ever had a citation. And I think, personally, I think it's indicative of the kind of events that we're holding, that when the police were called last year, all 4 times, the police officers, of course, talked to me because there were other issues, but they all felt like there was absolutely no basis for a complaint.
In addition to that, because of like the car shows and stuff that's been around there for all these years, have you ever had issues with any parking prior to, as you said, all of this stuff coming up?
With the police, I mean, if people park in the wrong place, they're going to get towed, or typically the police are more gentle than that. They'll come by and get hold of me and try to find out if I can find whose car is parked.
But no citations or anything based on that?
No citations on us, no.
Okay. That's all I have. Thanks.
Thank you.
I have a couple questions. First of all, I do want to commend you for reducing the number of uses. I think that's great based on where you are located. Do you have an anticipated timeline for when you would move from a temporary stage to a more permanent stage? Any thoughts about when that might take place?
This is as permanent a stage as we plan to have, the one that we're using right now, or that we've been using.
Okay.
My effort in citing a future stage area, and I think we specified that it would be temporary, was just to make sure that I covered all the future bases that I could think of. That was sort of my charge from the city when I was learning how to construct an SPUD. So I tried not to leave anything out that we might do in the future, but a permanent stage back there wouldn't be an option. It'd be very expensive, for one thing, and you'd probably never recover the actual investment.
Okay. So it would just be moving the temporary stage from one location to the other, depending on if you needed to do that.
Yes.
Okay. How would you determine what to do with the speakers then? Because I think based on the drawing, moving the stage would then abut the neighbors to the west. Would that affect the noise level for them?
You know, I think that, now, I don't want to speak to for the neighbors, but I think that they actually probably would have preferred that the speakers be at that north end of the lot and pointed essentially toward the garage and toward the house. Speakers are pretty directional, so you can, if you put them in back there, you could kind of tuck them toward the interior of the lot.
Okay. All right.
Can you speak real quickly to frequency with this? If it were to be approved, would you be hosting more events or less events, or about the same?
We can typically manage in terms of our staffing. We can typically manage 2 events a week. You know, we probably that's probably the maximum that we like to schedule, just because these events are after-hour events. My scheduling ends at 6 o'clock for my staff, so anytime we have a later event, somebody has to work. Actually, 2 people have to work at night. You stretch your staffing pretty thin at that point. So the staffing limitations, now there were a couple of times, there was at least one time where we had 3 events in one weekend last year, I think. But operationally, that's a real burden for us. So Saturday and Sunday, we're having some music and Sunday afternoon inside, but Friday and Saturday and Sunday are typically when people are going to want to have events.
So my understanding is about the same, like,
It'll be, yeah, it's about the same as what we were doing last year. Last year, we were doing what we thought was appropriate for us within our plan.
yeah.
Based on what I've heard about what you plan, it seems like noise seems to be the biggest issue. Oh, my mic's not up. Noise seems to be the biggest issue regarding the performances. So I appreciate the fact that the speakers have been relocated to the side of the store and broadcast to the crowd. But I think honestly, if you plan to keep the stage as it is for as long as is conceivable, that seems to be the best location for the stage. Correct?
Yes.
For the time being. I don't think it'd be inappropriate to actually, if that's where the stage is going to be for the foreseeable future, that in the SPUD, to mandate that the speakers be positioned in such a way that there's the least amount of intrusion, noise intrusion into the neighborhood for the neighbors. If that seems to be the biggest beef is noise.
To that point, Commissioner Griffith, we haven't tried that yet because we're in a little bit of a catch-22 where I consulted a sound engineer, a good local musician, and asked him if he thought that was feasible. And he said the only way to find out is to try it. And we're not in a position to hold an event right now. But the possibility is, there are 2 possibilities that could defeat that. One is that the speakers are too close to the stage, even when they're back there. We don't know this yet, but if they're too close to the stage, then it'll create feedback for the musicians, either their vocals or their instruments, and that would render it not feasible. The other is that it's too far from the stage, and it creates a gap between the vocal and the delivery to the audience. Now, he thought that neither one of those were probably the case. But as we try to solve the issues of noise, I would also add that we run the risk of, and this is one of the reasons I don't want to commit those kinds of solutions to an ordinance. We run the risk of solving one person's objection and creating an objection for another person that's maybe on the other side of Eufaula. That doesn't really solve the problem. So it's not that we don't want to solve problems. It's that we don't want to commit solutions to an ordinance that we haven't found out to be, efficacious. So we'll probably want to put up a big fence. That's one of the most effective things that we can do. There's a property line issue right now because that same neighbor's fence is on our property. And if we were to move the fence to the property line, it further closes off their backyard. Not a very hospitable thing to do. So those things have to be worked out. And to me, those are the kinds of things that you work out on a neighborly basis. You give up some distance from your property line so you can do those kinds of things, which I have offered to do with them. But those aren't the kinds of things that I have tried to put into an ordinance. And I think that that's been misconstrued as an unwillingness to solve problems on my part. It's not that we don't want to solve problems, we don't want to commit errors to permanence.
I understand, thank you. And I thought that taller fencing bordering the property might also help mitigate some of the sound concerns.
That was one of the first things that the sound engineer said, was a no-brainer. We just have to negotiate the fence line.
Yeah, well, it's a bit of a dilemma, so.
We're optimistic.
Yeah. Thank you.
May I ask, was there you mentioned having the police called but not being cited. Was there a pattern as to like day of the week that it was occurring?
No, I mean, I shouldn't say no. Yeah, we play on Friday and Saturday nights typically.
So it wasn't like it was 11
Wasn't a
o'clock
school
at night on a Tuesday night or something?
No, it wasn't. And we were playing the sound, we took some steps to try to address the neighbors' concerns. We allowed the neighbor to actually come and work with the musicians and we allowed him to set the sound levels to what he thought was an appropriate level. I think that's rather unprecedented. But the musicians that we have are professionals, and they're there to play under our rules and under our purview. So they were very cooperative. We were really disappointed that having done that, the police were still called, and it's one of the reasons that we are here trying to get this set up where we can operate predictably and still within the parameters of all of the city codes and still function as a business. As for the trees, we have a pecan tree that's 120 years old and an oak tree that's 80, and they're the first two legacy trees in Norman, so I won't let him cut them down.
I had one question, not really relevant to the situation, but what are the 5 businesses that can operate under SPUD? That's a great idea, but.
Let me back up in the presentation. I had them listed here. And as I noted, they're all currently occurring. Oh, is that not?
I do have a copy of the PUD here under item 1A, general commercial uses. The general commercial uses permitted are uses based on already issued permits and uses on the property without any additional improvements. Item 1, restaurant. 2, catering establishment. 3, delicatessen store. 4, food truck parking. 5, office.
That's correct.
Thank you.
I thought I had that in the slide. I apologize.
And just another note, because I know there were some questions about it, they're in the item B1 site plan in regards to the future stage area. It did say that the stage to be used in the future stage area will be an event-specific, non-permanent modular unit that is put up for each event and then taken down after each event. So just a note, because I know that came up. Any other questions for the applicant? I actually have one. I'm sure you're in receipt of the protest letters, and I found some pretty common threads. One of them being that a lot of votes of appreciation for the Midway and for the community partnership. So I think a lot of the people protesting weren't necessarily protesting Midway as a whole, but this particular use. And without over speaking to every single letter and each person, because there was a lot of time put in by the neighbors into those, there were 3 reoccurring things that really stuck out to me, which were hours, occupancy, and frequency. And I did not see a lot of specifics in the PUD related to those other than the 12 to 10 p.m. But for example, as to how many days of the week, that was something that was brought up, weekdays versus weekends. As a person who likes to be in bed by 9 and 8:30 if I can get away with it, I definitely can appreciate the concerns for that. I know we've had some letters of support too, but as to not including specifically any difference of hours, numbers of days of the week, specific hour differences maybe for weekdays versus weekends is kind of where I'm looking at that, or just the number of hours in general. And then the occupancy really wasn't addressed here, which I know that would be in part determined by fire codes and other things, but it wasn't built into the PUD, and that was a pretty large concern for a lot of the neighbors. So hours, occupancy, and frequency were really the three main items. And I know hours were addressed, but why was occupancy and frequency not built into this PUD?
Well, I can take part of that and I'll let Bob answer part of that. The initial SPUD did have an occupancy number in it. The problem is that occupancy number was in essence random. And the random number was, okay, if everybody, we typically think we're going to have set maximum 75 people in the event. So if we go over, what number would that be? We in essence have 47 parking spaces available, 7 on site, 40 on the street. Assuming everyone drove and there were 2 to a car, it was just a random number. And what came out in the pre-development meeting is that, I'll just say it became obvious, any number picked was going to be objectionable to the people who were objecting. So because the number was random, we decided to eliminate the number out of it because there's no real way to determine. Now, what Bob would tell you is, I don't ever want to have more than 75 people at the event. It's too much work and becomes a hassle. But that occupancy number, there's just no good way to put it because it is governed by fire code. It is an outdoor event. Typically, there's nowhere near even 75 people, but it's that fear of if we say 150, then everybody assumes you're going to have more than 150 at every event. So if you say 100, whatever number you choose is going to become problematic, number one. So it's easier just to be silent in that regard. The other issue with regards to the days is I think the applicant would remain open to modification of the days or limitation of the days. But again, I'll be blunt. The people who were most aggressively opposed to this, it is obvious that nothing was going to appease them because they just don't want it. So again, trying to negotiate a concession with somebody that really doesn't care what the concession is and just is opposed to the project in general, that is not particularly productive. I know the applicant would remain willing to consider an amendment to the SPUD that does tighten the number of days down, but the occupancy is under no real circumstance. It's just not practical.
And do you know what your occupancy would be by the city if this was approved?
My inside occupancy is 42. And then I don't believe there's a specific outside occupancy. And honestly, the first time that we addressed occupancy, I think the problem that we ran into was that the people who objected to it were thinking of it as some sort of a goal on our part, that if we said we were going to put a limit, instead of seeing it as a restriction, they saw it as a permission. Right now, we don't keep track of how many people are outside in the patio at any given time. I can tell you we have about probably 50 or so chairs outside. But we left the occupancy out so that it wouldn't become an inflammatory. It was just being interpreted as a permissive number instead of a restrictive number. It actually is, it is a restrictive number because we don't have any particular restriction right now. So any number you put on it would be a restriction.
So to clarify, I can call and rent the space. What would you tell me the number of guests that I would be safe to invite? Like if you were, I understand your argument, but if I were to say, can I invite 150 people? Is that going to be okay? Or would you say, oh, no, you need to stick to 75? Is there a?
No,
What would you
that's a
tell?
fair question, and I actually had some people talk to me about a class reunion that they thought they'd have about 150 people for. I don't think we can handle that. If they wanted to have an event that was 150 people, they're going to have to pay for a lot of contingencies that we would want to have in order to have extra staffing, in order to have porta potties, in order to arrange for the use of an auxiliary parking lot. The functionality of it just doesn't go over 100, both in terms of the space available and in terms of the facilities that we have at a given time. We function in a restaurant that typically, we may serve 200 or 300 people a day, but we serve them 50 or 60 at a time. And that's the staffing levels I have. It's not feasible to say, well, let's do a huge event. I just don't have the resources to call in extra people even. There's just a limit to what you can do and do well. And I can tell you that when Maricha and I talked about events in the backyard, we felt like 100 was the most we could do. We've done some music things that had 75 people, and my staff handled it well. And so I feel like that's.
Thank you. That's the
appropriate
number, I mean, not my number, but your number that I was looking for. So,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Any other questions for the applicant before they sit down?
Would you be opposed to amending it to state 75 and no more than 3 days a week?
I expect that from talking to our city council people, I expect that they're going to have some requests for us like that, and we're prepared to work with them as this goes forward.
Okay, so, but you're opposed to entering some amendments proactively prior to city council's?
You were asking for 75 people?
That's what I heard your presenter mention, and then you mentioned 175, so I went with 75 as that was the commonality there.
Well, I have to say I haven't considered the possibility that the planning commission would ask for those kinds of modifications, but I do consider that the likelihood that the city council will, and we're prepared to do what the city council thinks is appropriate.
Okay.
Just for sake of making sure, while you're up here, so for the process from here, the version that would go to city council usually would be the final version that they would vote to either approve, postpone, or reject. If either we voted no at this point or at city council level, unless I'm misunderstanding you, there would be a 1-year hiatus before it could be brought back forward again. So I might be speaking out of turn, but I think what the commissioner was looking for is if you would be amenable to making a change to your PUD before it went to city council so that city council could review at their meeting, or even coming back to planning commission to review it before actually submitting the current version to planning commission, which would, if declined, cause a 1-year delay before you could resubmit.
Get legal, excuse me. It's all.
The answer is yes, we would be willing to, if you wanted to amend the resolution before you to include an additional restriction in the SPUD going to council with a maximum number of days at 3 per week and a maximum occupancy of, I think, 80 to 85 would be acceptable. we'll say 80. I mean, 75 is functional. We're kind of having to consider this on the fly, so, 100 is max, 75 is a good functioning number, so let's say 80. So if you wish to make an amendment to approve it contingent upon the SPUD being.
Yeah, I was going to ask, let me go ahead and ask that question.
I think we understand your challenge with the number. I think we were just making sure that you were amenable to making a change is the main point.
If you wanted to do that,
Yes,
and make a motion.
trying to
send forward.
help you, because what we have to do is vote on what the document is that they're voting on. So, yeah.
I understand that, and I appreciate that.
So functionally, what's the difference between 75 and 100? I mean,
Well, I suppose it depends on whether you're going to be tasked with counting heads at every event. That's probably the primary question.
I've been there. 100 seems like a tight squeeze. It's a nice space.
Point of
but 75
clarification.
seems like the normal size for it, so.
I can tell you,
Point of clarification, are we talking about 75 outside or 75 including inside and outside?
Just a note with 42 being already the occupancy inside. So I think that is a great point of clarification. So yeah, that's a great number. Yeah, is it?
There's occupancy for 40
So I'd like
inside
to
and 50
answer
outside.
that with a question. When you say you've had 75 or 100 people there, has that included the inside occupancy numbers?
yeah.
Okay, so then I think it's fair to say whatever number we're talking about is including inside.
Okay, this is maybe more appropriate for planning commissioner comments,
I want-
but that would be 30 people outside, which.
yeah, excuse me,
He said he has 50
that's not
seats
true.
already outside.
That's not true. That doesn't include the inside.
Okay, thank you. He's saying it does not.
All right.
I think the short answer is yes, we would consider those restrictions.
Okay. Any other questions for the applicant? Thank you for your time with this and working with us.
Thank you for answering all those questions.
Wonderful. Okay. Not to further delay, I'd like to open up for audience comments. So just a refresher, I have a stack of these half-tan sheets up here. If anybody has one of these they've not already brought up, if you don't mind doing so now. If you do want to speak or you have not already completed them, they are on the cart in the rear to the room. You'll just fill that out. This is item number 8 for point of reference, if you'd like to write that on there. I'm going to call you up to the front if you don't mind coming to speak at the microphone. And start, please, with your full name and address. And then I'm going to start a timer at that point just to make sure we can hear everybody, have chance to discuss. And that will be 3 minutes per speaker. If you would like to be given a 30-second warning before your time is up, please let me know in advance. Otherwise, I'm going to yield that full time to you and then thank you at the end of that time. It does go fast, and I apologize for when I have to thank you for your time in advance. So I'd like to ask Dan Munson to come forward if Dan is available.
It can be after this comment, but could I request just a short break in between some of these comments?
Yes, thank you.
Do you want to do that now?
It's up to you.
We're going to take a break now, Dan, if that's okay. And then do we need to set the time we're coming back? We don't.
Yes, please.
Let's return at 8:20. So it is, I have 8:14 right now, 8:20. Thank you.
I'm sorry to let you guys start teacher conference night. So my last one, of course, showed up late, as I literally person every.
Erica?
Well, the world didn't end.
Yeah, no, it didn't. I knew it.
Just to let you know,
But as I was parking, I was like, oh my gosh, I hope it's in the old place. I don't remember seeing it. It was in the new place.
Thank you.
Facility's going to be next door in the library?
Yes, yes.
Really? When's
Yeah,
that gonna
they've been remodeling it really close, really. I keep expecting anytime we get, here's your packet. One of these times it's gonna say, to be held in the.
They're all the same.
new building.
So this will be strictly council, and then that will be other meetings, or everything's going to be?
No, I think everything's gonna be in that.
What are you going to do with this?
Maybe for other hearings, so that they can actually have hearings to certain things and so we can operate.
I miss city council. I'm so out of the loop.
Yes.
Sure.
Well, that sounds like fun.
I guess it's,
Definitely a staff question. So
But
the
it's-
gentleman that led off,
Yeah. Yeah.
or the lady standing,
Yeah.
the redhead,
Like LeBron.
Who's on the end? Cameron's the last one, right?
Yeah, there's another.
All right, I'm gonna call us back at 8:20 p.m. and then returning. So sorry. Dan Munson, thank you. Will you please state your name and address, and then we'll get started.
I'll take the 30-second warning, please.
Thank you.
Dan Munson, 208 Waterfront Drive, Norman, Oklahoma, 73071. So this year, the city of Norman was selected as one of 4 cities to become a Strong Town Community Action Lab participant. So one of 4 cities in North America. And some of the principles of Strong Town include walkability. That's a really big thing about strong towns. And one of the founder of Strong Towns came and did a presentation, I don't know, it's like maybe a month ago. And one of the things that he stated was that some of the challenges with urban sprawl was businesses were leaving neighborhoods. And so what I wanted to just kind of talk about here is exactly what Strong Towns is talking about. It says America's current approach to growth emphasizes investments in new infrastructure to serve or induce new development. This approach uses public dollars inefficiently, destructively subsidizes one type of development over another, and leaves massive maintenance liabilities to future generations. A Strong Town approach emphasizes obtaining a higher return on existing infrastructure investments. We can no longer simply disregard old investments in favor of new, but instead we need to focus on making better use of that which are already committed to publicly maintain. That's what Midway Deli has been doing since 1955. 1955. That's 68 years. Bob's owned this property for 38 years. Now, this neighborhood has supported Midway. But they have also, I would also say that Midway has supported this neighborhood. And if Bob really wanted to get a bunch more volume, he'd be better off at Campus Corner. He'd be better off at Main Street. He'd be better off at Brookhaven. But he's committed to this neighborhood. There's no benefit to him to have his neighbors mad. So if you're for Strong Towns,
30 seconds.
then I believe you're for Midway Deli. And you should support him expanding the use of this facility. Also want to mention that there's a train pretty close to Midway Deli. Trains generate 85 to 90 decibels. A freight train will have 85 to 90 decibels. It runs around the clock, 7 days a week, and that train has been really noisy for a century.
Thank you very much for
Thank
your
you.
time. Okay. Odette Horton. Is Odette Horton available? Just a reminder, state your name and address, please.
Odette Horton, I live at 318 College Avenue in Norman, Oklahoma, 73069. Running a business and running a household are intrinsically two very different pursuits, hence zoning regulations. The very nature of a business requires it to assert its presence and promote itself. Its game is offense. Running a household is a question of establishing functionality with your very own aesthetic. No promo involved. It's a game of defense to establish and defend your territory. Midway has an application in to expand into a business that has no place in a residential neighborhood. So now my castle is threatened and I must speak out to defend my home, lifestyle, and property value. Midway has a budget for self-promotion. I do not. So, if I may, I will borrow from Midway to describe what is so special about the place I live from its website. Hidden in the heart of Norman, tucked catty corner at the end of a quiet residential street, sits an old-fashioned deli where a meal is still a treat. The Midway bought the home in 1997. We chose the location for a few reasons. It was close to OU, where we both worked. It was affordable for a couple who are both in education, and quiet block that T-bones right into Eufaula. No through traffic on the street, safe place to raise our children. We qualified for a mortgage, invested in our new neighborhood. Just like us, others bought into what was really a pretty funky but affordable neighborhood. We all invested. We renovated, rebuilt, landscaped, and maintained our properties. In the 26 years since we've lived here, 6 of the 8 houses in the 300 block of College Avenue have been renovated. According to the Cleveland County, Oklahoma Assessor's Office, the value of those 8 properties, using the current market value figure, has increased from under $400,000 to over $2 million. Multiply what happened in the 300 block of College Avenue by all the facing and adjoining blocks and the blocks that face and adjoin those. That is how this neighborhood developed and grew in value. Investments made by all the owners. We have made this neighborhood we want to live in. We own it. It was built by us. We grew it. In fact, the success of Midway rides on the coattails of our investments, sacrifices, and improvements. Why should one man's business aspirations trump the interests of the residents who live here? Please help us keep our neighborhood the kind of neighborhood we want to live in and not become party central. Thank you.
Kim Zaylor, sorry, I was waiting for my microphone. I appreciate it. And just a reminder, start with your name and address, please.
Hello, my name is Kim Zaylor. I live at 304 Chautauqua Avenue, Norman, Oklahoma 73069. And I just want to say that we are already dealing with parking issues in regards to Midway. And in fact, on March 26th, which was a Sunday just a little bit ago, there was a small event that was hosted by Midway. I don't know how many people were there. If the capacity is 42, there were multiple cars on Eufaula and Chautauqua that were parked on both sides of the street, directly under no parking signs. It reduced the traffic to 1 lane. I was trying to get through with my car, and there were cars coming the other direction. If that had been an ambulance, it would have been bad. And it was on a Sunday, so there's no parking enforcement on Sundays. So if this SPUD passes, then they can, we lack the infrastructure to support additional traffic and congestion that 75, 80 to 100 people coming to the Midway on weekends when there's no parking enforcement will create. And right now there was no mitigation, there was no attempt to tell the guests not to park like that in our neighborhood. That's really all I have to say. No, actually, I won't say that. Right now, I mean, even in that little, on that day, that seemed like game day traffic. It felt like in my neighborhood, it was game day traffic on a Sunday. And I know it was just in a little part, it wasn't my whole neighborhood, but on a game day, we have tow trucks and we have parking enforcement all over the place to keep this from happening. So they don't park on the other side of the street, and we don't have it reduced down to 1 lane traffic. This will allow game day traffic 7 days a week, 365 days of the year, and especially on weekends when we don't have any recourse for that. And it's dangerous. So that's all I'd like to say. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much for your comments. Moving now for Ruth Walker. Again, just your name and address when you speak, and if you want the warning, tell me. If not, full time.
Sure, I'll take the 30 minutes. My name's Ruth Walker. I live at 524 West Comanche, which is just kind of catty corner across the alley from the Midway. That's Norman. I'm sure you know that. My property is 100 feet from where he's going to put his temporary stage. Okay. Currently, Midway is having indoor concerts with all the doors and windows open. So the customers outside can hear the music when they sit outside. Unfortunately, I can hear it in my backyard. Just Sunday, I wanted to listen to Folk Alley on KOSU and in my backyard because it was a beautiful evening. And I couldn't because the noise from the Midway caused a cacophony. So I just gave up and went inside. So I couldn't enjoy my backyard. And that's, you know, it's the Midway. It's quite a ways away from my house. When it's 100 feet from the stage, which is where my property is, I'm going to hear that music in my house. That's intolerable. That's insanity. The next owner who buys my house after I'm dead and gone is going to buy less than I bought, because the next owner isn't going to be able to sit in the backyard and listen to the birds sing, depending on the schedule of the 3 days a week concerts, right? Inside my house, I don't care if it's the Boston Pops or the Metropolitan Opera. I don't need the culture that they're trying to bring to me, okay? I got my own. I'm doing fine. I don't want this in my neighborhood. Whatever he's fine to do whatever he wants, but not when it impinges on me. The rights that are being taken away from me are my property rights, my rights to enjoy my property. And if I come back to you in a year and I say, hey, this is terrible, fix it, you're going to look at me and you're going to say, well, ma'am, those are his property rights. We can't take away his property rights. And you'll be right, because you will have taken those rights away from me, away from us, and you will have given them to him so that he can monetize those rights in return for nothing. We get nothing for this except the culture that they're trying to bring to us. They're socializing the costs, parking, noise, crowds, to all of us, while privatizing the profits to themselves. That's not right. I want to say one more thing about variance permits. My understanding is you get 7 a year. So when he says, and I could be wrong here, but when he says, oh, 7 to 11, we're not going to do that. We're only going to do noon to 10, 365 days a year. So he's actually increasing, not decreasing, by what he's doing. Please,
30 seconds.
Please reject this application. Honestly, I'd rather, at this point, if you put a marijuana dispensary in the Midway, I won't hear it in my backyard. I won't hear it in my house. I can listen to the birds, which is what I like to do. I don't want to be blackmailed by somebody saying, baby, you better take this deal. It's the best one you're ever going to get. That's flim-flam. Don't fall for it. Reject this application. Thank you so much.
Moving to Ken Womack. And just for the sake of posterity, name and address to start, please. And if you want the 30-second warning, let me know.
Okay. Ken Womack, 511, excuse me, West Eufaula, Norman, Oklahoma, 73069. While I appreciate the Pollyanna presentation you guys heard about the Midway, I don't think that my neighborhood's an appropriate location for an event center, and that's what this is. Why would I want to allow a non-resident of my neighborhood to set policy and standards for my neighborhood? Why would I want to invite 150 strangers on to our neighborhood 3 to 4 times a week to consume alcohol and party? That's 500 to 600 people a week. That's 2,000 a month, 25,000 people a year coming through our neighborhood. Alcohol and groups encourage vandalism. I've had beer bottles, beer cans, all kinds of trash left in my front yard. I've had tire tracks through my front yard. I've had hanging plants stolen off my front porch. This is not about music. This is about revenue. Revenue from the sale of food and alcohol at the expense of our neighborhood. There's many appropriate locations in Norman for an event center, which I support. But our neighborhood is not one of them. This creates significant traffic issues, both foot traffic as well as vehicles. This causes security issues and obvious parking problems. If I simply want to have a family gathering at my house invite my 3 adult children to bring my grandkids over to my house, I have to check the event schedule first, or they're going to park 5 to 6 blocks away from my house, maybe a half a mile or more. That's just not right. An event center simply creates an inconvenience for us as neighbors. It's intrusive, it's disruptive to our lives, it creates security issues, it has a negative effect on the quality of our life, our property values, the convenience of our life, and the overall integrity of our neighborhood, which up to now has been a classic, iconic neighborhood in Norman. There's no upside for us, there's no benefit for this neighborhood. It only benefits one person, and that's the applicant, who gets to, by the way, return to his family and children in a nice, quiet neighborhood in another ward and not in our neighborhood. As commissioners, I wonder if you would support this in your own neighborhood. And I implore you to vote your conscience as if this proposal was being made in your neighborhood. This is not a complicated issue. This is a really simple matter. An event center is not appropriate several days a week in our neighborhood. There has no benefit for us as individuals or our neighborhood. And splitting hairs over noise between 10 o'clock and 11 o'clock, that is so petty. That has nothing to do with the quality of our life.
Thank you very much for your comments. We appreciate them. Moving to Rick Poland.
Hi, I'm Rick Poland. I live at 425 Chautauqua, which is about a block and a half south of Midway. And this is really hard for me because I consider Bob and Maricha to be friends, and I love Midway. But I really think that this is inappropriate for our neighborhood. And one thing to consider, I mean, Midway's been there. I moved in 1992. It's always been there. It's always been great. But the property to the east, where the barn is and the yard that's proposed to be the backyard, that's, I believe, was residential zoning up until just a couple of years ago when it was rezoned commercial. Is that right? No, I'm talking about the backyard, right? The garage in the backyard, it was one residence, right, with the yeah, but was it rezoned?
Just for sake of your time, if you want.
I'm taking up all my time. I thought it was, maybe I'm wrong. Was it not commercial?
We might bring that up in discussion, but for
I
sake
can
of
tell
your
you it was
time.
always a residential property the whole time that I've lived there. And I mean, they couldn't do the outdoor concerts now if they didn't have that. So I think that's relevant to consider that. Plus that they're going from, you know, like other people have said, you can get 7 outdoor events a year if you get your permit. And now it's, I mean, you got to look at what the SPUD is going to allow, which at this point has virtually no limits. I just, you know, it's just a much bigger burden on the neighborhood than I think is reasonable. Thanks.
Thank you. Dana Anderson. Name, address, and let me know if you'd like the warning.
I'd like the warning. Dana Anderson, 207 Chautauqua and 306 Chautauqua, Norman, Oklahoma 73069. I'm glad Rick went right before me. This is very awkward and uncomfortable for us. We are a close neighborhood. Most of us have bought food at Midway Deli over the years. It is charming. Nobody's disagreeing with that. So this has put us in a very adversarial, awkward relationship. Midway's request to become a concert and private event venue in a residential neighborhood defies common sense. I honestly can't believe we're having these conversations, and is not appropriate for this residential location. These events will require the residents to sacrifice the peaceful enjoyment of our own homes for the gain of a private business. As Odette noted as well on Midway's website, they capitalize on our sweet neighborhood. Hidden in the heart of Norman, at the end of a quiet residential street, sits an old-fashioned deli. I promise you, when he has his music, whether it's indoors or out, it is no longer a quiet residential street. Promise. The applicant has reminded us that we knew we were buying houses next to a commercial business. This is true. However, most of us have lived in the neighborhood for 20 to 30 years, and what we knew was we were buying a home next to that old-fashioned deli on the quiet residential street, as described on their website. Over the years, they've grown. Midway has grown and changed. Recently, the applicant bought a 100-year-old large family home next to the Midway. He told us he was turning the house into an Airbnb, using the garage as catering prep space and the yard for extra deli seating. There was no mention of an outdoor concert venue, no mention of a wedding and private party venue. He is already booking weddings of 100 guests. No mention of parking for the untold numbers of people parking on our quiet residential streets. It has simply outgrown what the Midway used to be. The proposal makes enforcement of these policies or guidelines, whatever they are, essentially the responsibility of the neighbors. My husband was the one who called the police at the advice of the city when we felt there was no recourse, and he'll own that. Midway has 7 parking spaces. Customers already are parking on our streets during the lunch hour. That is totally fine. Most of us are at work. We're proud to be by the Midway Lunch Deli. I won't talk much more about parking, but who's monitoring the parking? He's talking about shuttles. Who's stopping somebody from parking in front of my house? Or don't mind if they park in front of my house. Okay, but not at all. Okay, most importantly, guests at these public and private events are free to leave when they want, if the music is too loud or if it's time for them to go to bed. We can't go home to our quiet residential neighborhood like the Midway's customers can, or guests at their private events. Our ability to have our own events has been hijacked by this proposal. The applicant is exploiting the charm of our quiet residential neighborhood for his own gain, and it's gone too far. Why does a single
Thank you very
business get to
much.
hold our neighborhood hostage? Thank you.
Thank you. Chuck Anderson?
I would have liked to show a video, but I'll have to give you a link to a website.
And then if you will do your name, your address, and let me know if you want the warning.
Like the warning. Chuck Anderson. I've owned and lived at 306 Chautauqua for 19 years. I've owned 207 Chautauqua for 17 years. There's a Midway concert stage 15 feet from my backyard fence facing the back of my house, and I'm playing very loud music. The applicant never contacted me, my wife, or our renter to ask if it was okay to put a stage there and direct it to our house. It started on a random Thursday night with very loud live music. Common sense would conclude that no one in this room would volunteer to have this in their neighbor's yard facing their bedroom. Not even the applicant wanted that, because he could have faced the stage toward his own rent house, but he chose not to. I have offered for him to turn the stage around, to take the property, the back of my property, so I could see the back of the stage and the back of the speakers. None of this plan shows me ever seeing the back of the speakers. We measured one of the concerts on our iPhone app. It was 83 decibels. Trains, I understand, are 85 decibels. I would encourage you to talk to me later in the comments and ask me questions about calling the police and mediation. I think there's some misrepresentations that were presented earlier. Having a live amplified concert venue is not something you expect in a neighborhood that you move to with a grocery store or deli. At most, you might expect some background music similar to the piano player at Legends, or maybe a guitar in the backyard. You know, this would be perfect for Midway Unplugged, pure acoustic. That would be wonderful back there. Or if you move next to a commercial property, you could expect that they could have a noise variance permit, which allows 7 concerts per year. Last summer, Midway had 5 concerts in 11 days, including a Thursday and Sunday night. I agree with city code, 7 is the limit per year. Where I live at 306 Chautauqua, with my doors closed and windows closed, it's 100 yards away, and I could still hear the music clearly inside my house. It goes without saying that it's really loud inside of 207 for my renter. None of us bought next to a fraternity house. We didn't buy next to Campus Corner. We bought next to a deli. If If you look at what's being proposed on paper, it seems ridiculous to put an outdoor concert venue with amplified sound in the backyard. It may be great music, a great cause, it could enrich us culturally, but it's simply the wrong place, and the plan shows no consideration for the neighbors. We have loved going to Midway over the years, and would like to see it succeed and make money, but not at our expense. So what this is proposing is that the applicant who doesn't reside in our neighborhood
30
able to
seconds.
come to our neighborhood, have loud music for 2 to 3 hours at a time for a private function that no one in the neighborhood is allowed to go to, and then go back to his own quiet neighborhood with his profits. This is done at our expense. If music is so important to the applicant, he should move to a more appropriate location or use Andrews Park and take his food truck. When Robert Frost wrote, "Good fences make good neighbors," he was thinking about animals who could overrun a weak fence. Obviously, Frost hadn't considered that landowners, not their animals, would intentionally overrun their neighborly boundaries with amplified sound.
Thank you very much for your comments.
Thank you.
Austin Brewer. Name, address, and let me know if you'd like the warning.
I would like the warning. My name is Austin Brewer. I live at 204 Chautauqua, directly adjacent, offsetting the Midway Deli. We moved back to Norman about 2.5 years ago. And to us, Midway, or as my 5-year-old daughter calls it, Bob's house, is a gathering place for the neighborhood and a place where all are welcome. From our perspective, music and direct experience on multiple occasions is no louder, and in many instances, less loud than the summer breeze, Norman High football games, or track meets. We can hear them just as loud, if not louder, especially summer breeze. More importantly, Bob has asked for input on sound levels and timing. I've given him my thoughts, and it's never been an issue. Even more importantly, like I said, we have a 5-year-old at home. She was 2.5 when we moved. We've never had a problem sleeping, and the parking has never been an issue for us. Nor has there ever been traffic issue that we couldn't overcome, just normal business. I could be wrong, but I believe I might be one of the only citizens with a young child speaking tonight that's at home. And music is not a problem, like I said, and moreover, you can typically find our daughter dancing on the Midway patio or in the backyard when music has been played in the years past. More specifically on the parking, it has not been an issue on Chautauqua where we live for OU students, employees, and patrons to park. And after all, these are public streets. Prior to moving back to Norman, we lived in Austin, Texas for 3 years, and prior to that, we lived in Denver, Colorado for 5 years. Both of these places are consistently ranked as the top places to live on every list you could look at. And we lived in communities that had neighborhood gathering spots similar to the Midway. Great food, live music, neighborhood friendship. Midway has this and more. This is both very rare in Oklahoma and neighboring states and communities across America these days. And it is a huge reason we moved back and chose to live specifically in this neighborhood adjacent to the Midway. Midway is the fabric of this neighborhood, and with Bob having owned and operated it since 1985, one of the longest tenured residents, by the way, it's only getting better. Let's continue to make Norman in this neighborhood a desirable place for young
30
families
seconds.
like mine to move back to, supporting small businesses at the Midway, with gathering at the Midway for live music, good food, neighborly friendship for many years to come. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your comments. Ben Alpers. Thank you. And your name and address to start, please.
Okay, Ben Alpers, 208 Chautauqua, Norman, Oklahoma, 73069, directly across the street from the Midway, where we've owned our house since 1998. This meeting is just the latest stage of a neighborhood conflict that essentially began when the current owner of the Midway installed an outdoor stage on his property fairly recently and began having regular outdoor live musical events. One of the things I've learned from this conflict is the wisdom of C1's prohibition on restaurants having outdoor live entertainment and outdoor dance floors. And the reasons for that prohibition are more, not less, relevant in a neighborhood that has mixed use, largely residential zoning like ours. The harmful impact that this SPUD would have on the life of our neighborhood and our property values is not just a matter of speculation. You've heard about it a lot from other people. We know it from the events last summer. Last summer, the owner of the Midway had a series of outdoor live musical events that were supposed to incidentally stop at 9 p.m., not 10 p.m., which is what the proposal would allow him to do, which in turn, it turns out, were violations of his zoning. These events created unacceptable levels of noise in the homes of its closest neighbors, noise that we still believe violated Norman's noise ordinance. And I believe Chuck Anderson made reference to this. When he called the police refused to measure the decibel level because it said it was too hard to use the decibel thing, and so instead asked him to file a disturbing the peace complaint. There has been no measuring of the noise. Some of us have tried measuring it ourselves. It is violating the noise ordinance. A number of us reached out to the owner of the Midway to find some mutually agreeable solution to the noise problem, but the owner did not mitigate the noise. As a result, the only recourse neighbors had was to call law enforcement each time the noise intruded on our lives and violated the noise ordinance. And for the record, I did not do that. We've already heard the Andersons did, but I supported them in doing so. The result of this was still more conflict that you've already heard about. Conflict that was not only between the neighbors and Bob, but neighbors and each other, and this spilled onto social media, where Bob started describing us in the neighborhood as being against live music in general, and I got on Facebook people from Lawton telling me I should move. This is no way to live. That is not a tenable situation. This SPUD would put us right back in that situation, but worse, as it would allow for larger, more frequent, later, and private outdoor entertainment events.
30 seconds.
Variance requests are limited in number, and they can be discretionarily turned down. And the city, I've heard, turned him down recently, apparently because they didn't want more conflict. There's a simple solution here. Turn down this rezoning request, keep Midway's C1 zoning that prohibits it from having outdoor live entertainment. This location is a classic example of why that rule exists in our zoning ordinance. We should all be glad it's there.
Thank you very much for your comments. Karen Schuler? Oh, apologies, sorry. You'll say your name and your address so you can correct me.
Okay,
And then
yeah.
let me know if you want the warning or I'll give you the full 3 minutes.
Yeah, give me the 30 seconds, yeah. Okay, Karen Schucher, 208 Chautauqua, married to Ben. Yeah, so we've lived directly across the Midway for 25 years, and this neighborhood is our home. We raised our kids here. We have always loved its diversity and activity. But anyone who lives in a campus neighborhood knows how very fragile the residential balance is block to block, how easily these neighborhoods can shift towards party houses, mini dorms, fraternity annexes, and the newest encroachment, these sort of monster Airbnb, party Airbnbs. In our quarter century, we've seen some positive developments, but also cases of real neighborhood erosion, for which Elm Street, just 2 blocks away, is a prime example. So I want to talk about the impact on us currently of this commercial property. There was a time when this business was in balance with the neighborhood, was seen as an amenity by all of us. That relationship is now decidedly out of balance. The commercial activity across the street from us dominates and overwhelms life on our block. It made life inhospitable for our elderly next-door neighbor who passed away last year, but had lived in that house for decades, I'm sure longer than the Midway. The noise, the trash, the parking, the traffic made her feel isolated. It was hard for her to get in and out and hard for relatives to get to her. The neighborhood no longer felt like her home, and she talked to me so many times about wanting to move. And then you just heard the story about my husband, the two of us being told we needed to move. We did not deserve to live in this neighborhood because if we opposed this business plan. We believe that the neighborhood belongs to the diverse people who live here, and we do not think it should be zoned to serve one person's financial interests. But what I just described was the status quo. if we now go with this SPUD, for this applicant and for all future owners, and that's so important, all future owners, all the guardrails will be off. And above all, what we can expect, the big money maker will be these large private parties with amplified entertainment, with alcohol, going until 10 all the time, and zero input from neighbors. A total loss of neighborhood control. And, we could talk about the sound situation. Again, we asked Bob to mitigate the sound, and he flatly refused us last summer, leading to this escalation. He told us at the time he knew that he was, that he was exceeding the
30
noise
seconds.
ordinance. And he knew it was, he clearly knew it was unenforceable. He did not care then until this all blew up. And I'm not sure he's going to care in the future when it's clear it's not enforceable. I ask you, please vote to preserve our fragile campus neighborhood for the people who call it home. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments. Jane Crumpley.
Jane Crumpley, 423 Elm. I wrote a letter, so you all have received my concerns. Our home is just outside of the 350-foot notification area. But I have the utmost sympathy for the neighbors who are surrounding the area for this outdoor entertainment. I mean, we loved Midway. For lunch, we would have guests come in, and they were so impressed that we had this in the middle of our neighborhood. But to have outdoor entertainment and music and the parking, we have to put up with game day parking on Elm for 6 or 7 games a year, or if there's another function in the stadium. So these individuals in this neighborhood, R1 homes, have to put up with game day plus these additional times of people coming. If you figure 50 people came, it's probably 25 cars. For game day, we have a full contingency of parking enforcement. Parking enforcement doesn't work after 5, and they don't work on weekends. Calls to the police department are going to overwhelm the dispatch. They're short in dispatch. They're short in officers. So trying to get somebody to respond because somebody is encroaching on your driveway, they can't get down the street because they're illegally parked on one side, are things that we all put up with for game day on Elm, but we have a full parking contingency. Please, we love Midway, but this is no way to allow it to go into and disrupt a neighborhood. We have a mini dorm next door before we got downzoned. So we have been impacted by allowable uses that the city has allowed to the detriment of our neighborhood. So please, I hope that you will support the neighbors and consider what they're putting up with. One brief thing too, I've never heard anybody talk about restroom facilities. So are there going to be portalettes in the backyard that there'll have to be the noise of loading, unloading? I don't know. It's not been referenced. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments. Are there any other audience members that would like to make a comment that didn't already submit a slip where we otherwise, oh, come on up. Yeah. I have never used it myself, so.
Well, we're about to find out. Oh, there's a good photo. So I'm Tara Myers. I live at, well, I don't live there, but I own 205 Chautauqua, the little blue house right there. So we bought this house 2.5, almost 3 years ago for our son. So our son is a graduate student at OU. He's lived there 2 years. We're hip. I think we're hip. I think we're fun. We love Midway. But when we bought this house, this backyard was not there. It was not, I'm sorry, I don't know why, it's just public speaking. Sorry, I'm not about to cry. So it was not like this when we bought the house. So that's fine and hunky-dory. We like music. We think it's great. Like this little setup is great. It doesn't bother my son at all. And by the way, he is in a fraternity. He was president of his fraternity. Oh, see, now I've goofed it up. Sorry. Anyway, so we don't mind all that. But where it gets weird, and I really need to show y'all I flubbed it up, I'm sorry. So what I really need to show you is that our house literally is beside the backyard of Midway. And so our master bedroom looks right into the yard. So my son will be walking through and people wave at him from listening to music. So it's gotten a little weird. So, and now that the stage will be literally like 15, 20 feet from right there. Oh, back up one. Oh, one more. Right there. So that's our blue house. And the stage will literally be across the alley right there. So now I'm like, well, so what do we do? It just seems weird. It just got weird. And we like music. We don't mind the way it is now too much. He hasn't complained, like I said, but it's weird now. So now we'll either be looking at a stage or we'll have 150 people looking in our backyard and in our master bedroom. My husband has threatened to start walking around naked when he's in town. So just watch out by that window. So it's a little weird. So I think if Bob, and we love Midway, it's fabulous. So if he could put parameters on it, like smaller number of people or, like 2 nights a week, we would be probably okay with that. I mean, but I'm afraid if there's weddings back there, not only will the music be one thing, but people are loud, just crowds are loud. So that's my concern. And then obviously people looking in our house. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments. Does anybody else care to make a comment for the audience that we didn't already get a card from? Okay. Seeing none, we'll move to Planning Commission discussion.
I'll make some
I have
comments.
a question. Am I on? No? Yes. Okay. I'm not really sure who to direct this to. So there are several comments that there is no parking enforcement on the weekends. Is that correct? So if there were to be an issue on a Saturday night at 8:30, there would be no response to that if there was a call? I'm looking at our officer in the room, and I don't mean to put you on the spot. I'm so sorry. But okay. Would it be a priority call or would it be, okay. Okay.
Does anyone know if parking enforcement does work on a usual Sunday? Okay, that's a no then.
Can I ask a related question of the city staff? What recourse do the neighbors have if the city won't measure the noise level? I mean, do they sue the city? I don't know, like, I'm just curious. And I ask because it's not their job to measure the noise level, right? It's the city's job to, well, it seems to me it's the city's job to measure it, to say definitively either it's too loud or it's not too loud.
Well, if a call comes in, it would go to the police department, as they stated, and the police department would go out. It's my understanding that there's only one. I'm not sure if, I'm sorry, we keep looking at you, but it's my understanding that there's only one unit. I could be wrong on that. They may have purchased more. I do not know. But I would say that it's probably up to the police officer when they get there to determine if they need to measure or if they don't. I mean, I don't want to speak for anybody, and I think that would be more of a, well.
Right now, we're in discussion. I'm so sorry. Thank you.
Yeah, and I can't speak to that, but again, when the police are called, they evaluate the case, the situation, when they get there.
Thank you.
I don't live in that neighborhood, but in my neighborhood, I've actually called the police on a Saturday night when 3 houses over was having a loud get-together in the backyard. Police responded, and they shut it down here in Norman.
I've had similar experiences. I'm going to make, as far as police coming out and that they responding to the call, I'm going to make a few comments. I live in Ward 4. Not only do I live in Ward 4, I'm thankful to say that I live in this neighborhood. I live exactly 240 yards from the stage at Summer Breeze. It's very relevant to what we're talking about. I live 270 yards from the proposed stage at the backside of Midway Deli, 260 yards from the existing stage. So fairly equidistant between the two. My wife and I bought our house in this neighborhood 11 years ago. We bought our house for many reasons, but one of our first comments after we bought our house was we couldn't believe we were that lucky to live equidistant between two of our favorite places, the Earth and Midway Deli. We chose to live in this neighborhood because it's dynamic. I think that that's a key word here. We live in a college town. This is a college neighborhood. We love the dynamic nature of that neighborhood. It's great walkability. You have neighborhood businesses, as mentioned. You have events going on all the time. We can hear events going on at Campus Corner. We can hear events going on constantly in every direction, whether it's homes, whether it's in commercial districts, whether it's at the parks. We love that there's been the addition of the farmers market. Some examples of noise that happen in our neighborhood. We talked about events. Norman High School, the PA on Friday nights, or really Wednesday nights, Thursday nights, Friday nights, sometimes Saturday, depending on what's going on with track meets, it's booming, booming. There's movies in the park at Lions Park, where Summer Breeze is located. Summer Breeze, one of the best, most special cultural events that we have in all of Norman, been going on for nearly 30 years now, maybe more than 30 years. Attendance at Summer Breeze typically is over 1,000 people. People park in our neighborhood. They park up and down our street. The parking starts, it begins at 5:30 and it ends at 10 o'clock. That is stacking our street. We welcome it. I'm a big proponent of street parking. That's something that may sound counter to what a lot of people think. Street parking is safer, much safer. The limited access that cars have by cars parking on the street, it naturally makes people drive slower. In this SPUD, Midway Deli is required to follow the noise ordinance. I know there's been some discussion about enforcement of the noise ordinance. I would ask the city to make this a priority. If this were something to be put in place, that noise ordinance be followed. To me, one of the biggest things in this entire thing is that this absolutely tightens up zoning on this site. Call it a presentation, call it a Pollyanna, whatever needs to be said. This absolutely is a preservation effort. I was on the Historic District Commission for 6 years. This preserves this site as long as this zoning's in place. And otherwise, in the event that Bob were to sell this property, it would not surprise me at all if this thing were scraped. And it's sad to even think about that possibility. It is. But with what we've seen throughout campus neighborhoods, in my neighborhood, sites get scraped and anything goes up. And this opens up that possibility for C1 zoning that the comment about a medical marijuana dispensary going right there, I have no issue with medical marijuana dispensaries, but sure as hell don't want one right in that neighborhood. That'd be a nightmare. I mean, who would want that? That's crazy talk. So I could, that alone, as a preservation effort, I commend this application that this limits the use. Now, do I think that there are concessions that need to be made? Yes, I do. Do I think they need to be made tonight? No, we are not. We are appointed officials. We're not elected officials. We have elected officials for a reason. I trust my Ward 4 council member. I trust my council to come up with some concessions on this issue. I take issue also with the idea that this is only adding to the bottom line of the applicant and adds no quality of life to the neighborhood. As a neighbor, as somebody who experiences what goes on here, this absolutely adds to the quality of life to our neighborhood. It adds to the authenticity, it adds to the vibrancy, it adds to the dynamic nature of why people choose to live in this neighborhood. So again, do concessions need to be made? Absolutely, 100%. Hours, occupancy, frequency, whatever it needs to be, I want to see it happen because I'm excited about this and I'm excited about what the possibilities could be as an example for a good, well-meaning, responsive neighbor that's been there since 1985, and I believe that he will hold to what is included as part of this SPUD. I will say one of my concerns is private events that are outside of the control of the applicant. That's something that I've heard a few different times, and I think that that needs to be addressed and tightened up to some extent. Those private events, if not in the control of the applicant himself, I could see how something like that could get a little more unruly. But as far as a use with the applicant himself, I've seen personally no issue with what's going on in our neighborhood. Again, 240 yards, 270 yards. Call it almost exactly the same distance. Summer breeze, we can hear every dang thing that goes on out there. And we never complain. We knew what we were getting ourselves into when we bought in that neighborhood. I have never a single time heard any noise from the other direction when multiple events go on, including Midway Jam, including the 7 events that you're allowed to have a year. And so I think he's been respectful. I think he will continue to be respectful, and that's my opinion on the matter. So, again, concessions need to be made, but as someone who's experiencing a lot of these things and hearing a lot of these comments, this is why I love my neighborhood. So,
I'd like to springboard off some of those comments that Commissioner Brewer made. It's an unusual case. It's not often that you have someone create a SPUD that handcuffs them. Most of the SPUDs we see want all possible uses, right? They say, well, it's mostly a C1, so I want all C1 uses. The opposite is happening. This is preserving something that's been in the neighborhood for, 68 years? Long time. I think what we're experiencing are some growing pains. We want infill development. We want walkable cities. And we want restaurants we can walk to. We want entertainment we can walk to. And it's going to come with some growing pains. Maybe we need to change our noise ordinance levels for neighborhoods with live entertainment if we want walkable cities. Maybe that's something we need to do. Maybe we need to change how we enforce the parking. Sorry, I'm looking at you again, officer. Maybe we need to change how we enforce on Sundays, if we want these walkable cities. But we can't know how to change that until we start to put it in motion. Just like Bob said, he doesn't want to handcuff himself on the orientation of those speakers because he hasn't even tried yet. He's got to get it in motion to see what's going to work. I understand the noise concerns are valid, by the way, and the concerns that people from outside your neighborhood are making decisions. Those are valid concerns. I used to live in the neighborhood. I lived on Elm, the 400 block. I don't know if Bob knew this. I live 2 blocks from you. I loved it. I still eat at Midway. I still love it. I used to go to church with some of you. So, you know, you are neighbors. So these, you know, we aren't sitting up here abstract and removed from you and your concerns. You know, I think we are hearing your concerns, but I want to say I do think these are growing pains. But that's not a reason to stop ourselves.
I've got some thoughts here. So when we look at this spud, you know, it's been brought to our attention that it can lock things down and make it preserve it for the future. I've also heard a lot of comments about the noise, which is very objective. And then I've also heard a lot of comments about parking and how that can be an issue. And so just to throw something out, as part of the spud, could we require, you know, they wanted 100 people to be able to attend, so could we require 50 parking spaces and require parking on that so that, you know, it relieves the parking issue that's on the street, but you have to have that open during an event.
Just as a point of clarification, where would the parking come from?
Within the spud.
We had something similar with the Noun Hotel for Jablonski. Were you on? I may not. I don't know.
I'm that old.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. So the Noun had wanted the Noun, and correct me, I'm probably going to speak out of turn on some of these things from memory. They did not actually own a large portion of their parking. They had it as an agreement with the church, who actually owned the parking lot that was neighboring to them. One of our main comments we made is that we wanted to see such an agreement exist as part of approving their project, and not just be in discussion, but actually have a document exist at the point when city council would approve it. And in that was a hard pass. It was a close one, another very well-attended meeting. And in that sense, it was passed to approve at Planning Commission, but with the contingency that parking was there. I thought, you know, having a solution that addresses some off-site parking was great, and I know there's discussion, but I think if that was going to be relied upon for decision-making, something comparable would make sense too. Yeah, I think that you brought up a good point, and I think that they have looked at some of those solutions, but even if it's not solid today, I would feel that I would like to see that solid for our city council to vote on.
The comment I would make to springboard off that, I agree with that. I feel like in this spud, to use the terms lockdown and specifics, but not have specifics on the sound, days of week, almost felt like I was at an auction at the county fair with the occupancy numbers going up while talking about the possibility of being amenable. I feel like, with all respect to fellow commissioners, that you have, if there were a number of calls, you have had a go at this. And with each one of those, you could have thought, okay, so I'm still hearing parking. Let me call a tow truck company and I will let people know, like, we cannot park on this side. I have my own tow truck guy, you know, because I got to keep my neighbors happy. There's various things that I think could have been tried that I'm not hearing have been. And I'm concerned that there are not enough specifics to use the terms lockdown when we go from being able to have 7 events to unlimited events, even if we restrict the hours per day. So I think just because we could, and we see the potential for this locking down, does not mean that we should, or that we should hope on any face value of potential.
Addressing some of the parking, I don't disagree that parking could become an issue, especially if people are parking on both sides of the street. I think that there needs to be some solution there. But I don't think that off-site parking with required number of spots is the solution, personally. I think that street parking is absolutely adequate. We have streets, and they're public streets for a reason. People park on the streets in this neighborhood all over the place all the time. It's rarely ever an issue. I never have a spot in front of my house, ever, because there are all kinds of people that park there. Again, with Summer Breeze, movies in the park, that entire street fills up for 3 blocks straight. And so I will springboard off of Commissioner Jablonski's comment that call that growing pains, call that what basically most dense cities across the United States experience all the time. We are not a dense city. In fact, we are a very large, by square miles city, one of the largest in the nation for our population. And so we're going to experience increased density, especially in the core of Norman. That's just the reality of where things are moving. And street parking is going to have to become a regular thing that we're going to get used to. So I absolutely agree that parking on both sides of the street and an ambulance not being able to get through, that's an issue. That's something that cannot be okay. And I don't know how something like that can be incorporated in. That's not my expertise. At the same time, someone parking 2 blocks down the street and walking, or that's a regular thing, and that's not a concern of mine personally. So
I just want to clarify my comment. I wasn't specifically saying we have to find a solution for off-site. On-site parking is a feasible solution also.
Well, I don't think it is. I mean, just based on the site itself, I mean, just you're limited as far. I mean, I believe that there's 7 parking spots on site, and outside of raising a building, which is not something I would support, then on-site parking is not feasible on this site. So.
Any other discussion items you want to bring up? I've heard some topics specifically addressing additional parameters. Does Commission want to discuss how maybe they would like to approach that for moving forward?
I heard one of the commissioners mention using the elected officials. I like that idea. It's a popularity contest, that they have to win. And there are a lot of motivated constituents here from the ward. So it's hard for us in the moment, I think, to say 75 is the right number or 100 is the number. I think personally, I'm more comfortable with let this happen in a discussion, and a part of that discussion should be with the ward council member.
And I think that that's something we could include as a recommendation in the motion, that concessions be made with city council as part of approval. That's my suggestion.
I would agree with Commissioner Brewer that concessions need to be discussed with council.
Does any commissioner have an example that maybe they'd like to share for other commission for discussion of what said motion might sound like? So it sounds like the motion would potentially be a motion on the table to approve with a comment that we would expect there to be additional considerations decided upon at the city council meeting? Is that what I think the consensus is
I will make
coming?
that motion.
I'll second.
I've got one more comment, though. As a commission group, we're called to not only represent business or what we think maybe it should look like. We're called to represent everybody. And I think that that's important to consider in this, is that we've heard a lot of protests, 50% or more? I don't want to run the risk of sending this to council for it to get approved, and I'm going to vote to reject it here and now. And I would say that, you know, if we're going to look at other parameters or we want to explore other ideas, then we can push it back now. They've expressed that they're willing to look at that, and so I would say allow that opportunity first and come back with something that's maybe more agreeable.
I agree with that. I think that we either need to postpone with them coming back with very specific, respectful of all the feedback and conversation that is had tonight. I think it does not take into consideration to have a vague request for council to look at other things.
So an alternative motion that could be proposed then would be to postpone to allow for such changes to be brought back in front of Planning Commission for re-review and consideration prior to moving to City Council. So that would be another potential motion. Is there any other discussion that we want to make before we actually move to motions? And just making sure we've allowed proper time for the discussion to be completed before we move to motion. So
I would really like to see the zoning change to the SPUD to preserve Midway because of its historic importance to this neighborhood, and you know, alluding and my point being that that little house on Main Street, Dr. Bird was conscientious enough to preserve that and not tear it down, and I think that's important. Midway has been a staple in this neighborhood for a very, very long time, and the controversy seems to have arisen because of the concerts that appear to disquiet the neighborhood and the people who live there intensely. And I really don't know how to solve that. I don't know that we can come up, and maybe we can leave it to council to come up with a solution that would allow for activities of some sort, but still keep Midway and keep it as a viable entity in the neighborhood. But to me, the best part of this is just the SPUD. The other activities, I'm having a real hard time supporting simply because the neighbors as a whole, over 50% or almost 50%, don't want them. They love Midway, they love the food, they love the camaraderie, the gathering place, and it's wonderful for that. But if the neighbors are really up in arms about the music and the noise, it's really hard for me to support this as it is proposed. So I think perhaps postponing it and to get some clarification on some of the details. Parking is an issue, but there's no ordinance. There's no enforcement on weekends. There's no way to keep people from parking on both sides of the street. There's and how to quantify an appropriate number of people attending whatever event occurs. How do we do that? So anyway, so I would support a postponement and maybe flesh out some of the details so that this zoning change can move forward. But we've really got to consider all the folks who don't want it to happen, so.
I have a question for staff. So the Planning Commission is an advisory board to the city council. The noise ordinance, does any of that fall within our purview? I mean, should we as a body look at what other cities have done for neighborhood venues, if they lowered the threshold for noise? Is that something that, would be in our wheelhouse?
So if I'm understanding your question, if something came before you to vote on for changes in the noise ordinance,
That we could put forward a recommendation to the city council to consider for something like a neighborhood venue. Because this seems to be in a bit of a gray area, right? We have a noise ordinance, but it's not clear that that ordinance works well for this situation.
so are you asking if you could send for this item, you could send for, are you saying this item or something
Not this
else?
item, just in general.
Then you could send those recommendations to council, and then they could circle back around whether or not they wanted something to come forward to a council committee.
Yes.
Yeah, you would need to send those to council.
I believe that would be a miscellaneous discussion item for a point of order.
Apologies.
If it's, no, that's okay. I mean, just as a point of order,
Right.
because it is related, I think. But I think that if we had a general comment that we wanted to put forward that wasn't related to a specific item, but was still related to something that we have a role in, I think that would be a miscellaneous item if it's a general, I think.
Can I say one more thing?
Yeah,
So I just want to be clear. So the noise ordinance is not in Chapter 22, the zoning ordinance? It is in a different okay. I just want to make sure you were clear.
Thank you.
Question, point of clarification. With a potential postponement, is that something that the applicant would have to be agreeable to, or is that something that we would not, or is that?
I believe in our agenda, the options is pretty clearly say to approve, deny, or postpone. So that would be within our ability, and it's in every item in our agenda packet. It says what our actions needed are.
Okay,
As a point of order, a motion has been seconded and is already in play, so it would have to be withdrawn or voted on.
But it's postponed to a date specific.
It's postponed to a date specific, is what Jane has just said. So if we vote to postpone, we would vote to postpone to a specific date, such as, would there be enough time for like the next planning commission meeting would any new disclosures need to be given? I guess maybe not a pre-development meeting, but what would that look like? I mean, I don't think we've had many postponements here, so it's a good point of order to make.
So you could postpone to a date specific. I would probably confer with the applicant to see if they wanted to go to the next planning commission meeting, or if they thought that they needed additional time, to go to June. But you do have the option to postpone. We just have to have it to a date specific.
Thank you for clarifying. And I do think we do have a question on if there's a motion on the table and how to address the current motion on the table and the options when a motion is on the table but not yet voted on. Can you clarify that for us?
So you have to vote on it, or I believe you can have a motion to withdraw. The person that made the motion has to motion to withdraw, and then you have to second that.
Thank you.
I would prefer to keep the motion on the table. And that's specifically because I believe that concessions can be made and considerations can be made by our elected officials, as I've stated previously.
And I would agree with that. The applicant has gone through the process. The applicant deserves the right to either move forward from this commission or, and so I believe we as a commission need to take what has been presented to us and vote on it, and then it'll be forwarded on to to council to make the final decision.
there any other discussion items to make before we move to the motion? I want to make sure everybody's had a chance to address any items before we move to a vote. Okay. Seeing no additional discussion, I would take a vote for the motion on the table. Can we just read back our motion just to be 100% clear exactly what this motion is? Does anybody have it written down?
The concessions need to be discussed the applicant needs to discuss the concessions with city council prior to being at the council meeting for a vote.
A vote, I believe the motion was to approve with the comment.
Right, approve with the concessions, yes.
All right, we will take a vote now.
Do we have two motions?
No, we discussed what an alternative motion was, but we only ever had one motion on the table. That has to be addressed, I think, before an additional motion could.
Quick clarification, if they're going to meet with city council, is that a public meeting?
Yes. Can we clarify the motion that we're going to be voting on, please?
Sorry, can I clarify something, though? When you
Please.
say meet with city council, are you talking about the city council meeting when it's second reading, when they would vote on it? Or are you talking about the discussions prior to them going to the meeting that they would vote on?
My understanding was it's to meet prior to council meeting. Is that not correct?
No. There's
I was understanding at the meeting.
There's first reading. If memory serves me, there's
I mean,
first
it's,
reading.
I'm sorry, I'm going to have to get legal to weigh in on this one, because when you say a public meeting, the concession discussion could be one-on-one or two council members with the applicant, okay? But if we're talking about a public meeting, that is a council meeting that is here, and when it's on first reading, it is not discussed. So I just want to make sure everybody's clear on that.
Since I seconded, I'll say what I understood, that it would not be a public meeting. Is that right, Mr. Commissioner Brewer?
correct. I think that there's things to be worked out, but that would need to be proposed in a public meeting. Any changes to the SPUD that would then be voted on. So, but I assume that there will be discussion with council members prior to that public meeting.
And maybe just one more point of order. Theoretically, the city council could vote and change the PUD with the applicant at the city council meeting. Is that correct?
Correct. They can make changes on the floor that night.
Okay. Any other point of orders? Oh, let's get Beth. Beth, come. Do you have anything else you'd like to add to help us out with this?
No, it was just the question about the public meeting. I think we're okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. We're really stretching some skills. Thank you all for being here still. While we are in discussion, I will say if this goes to city council, there is another opportunity to make comment, to provide protests, and to do so at the next meeting too. So just for everyone, if they were not aware that there is an additional round, comment, positive, negative, can all be made again. All right, any other discussion, or can we move to a vote?
Can you state the motion very clearly as to what the motion is and when applicant should meet with two council members in a not public meeting? Is what I'm
Commissioner Brewer, will you please restate your motion?
Please make it very clear what we were voting on.
The motion is that, motion to approve with considerations made with city council members on amendments to the SPUD. That's not the
In
exact
public
wording.
meeting?
That's when the amendment would have to be made.
Okay.
Correct. Like you can't make an amendment in a private setting. It would have to be in the public setting. But the assumption is that there will be discussions with individual council members leading up to that meeting.
So the motion being that it would be to approve but with the recommendation that their concessions be made with city council on the amendment at the public forum, and an assumption that there would be discussions with city council in advance. Is that right or no?
That works.
Okay. And that is what you've seconded.
You got it.
Okay. Are we good to vote? Good to vote? All right, let's vote.
You may vote.
Oh.
Everyone has voted, and the motion carried 6-3.
Thank you very much. All right. Moving to miscellaneous comments of Planning Commission and staff. Are there any miscellaneous comments? We'll start with the miscellaneous comments from staff.
I guess the only miscellaneous comment I would have is that if anybody's interested, the applications for the upcoming committee for the comprehensive plan that's coming forward, those applications are still open. They were actually closed, but I believe they've opened them back up. There's an application on the city website if anybody is interested in applying to serve on that committee.
Great. And are the commissioners, are there any comments to make?
I'll just reiterate what I said earlier, that maybe the city should consider that we have, a two-tiered noise ordinance, where if we want to have live music in neighborhoods, that's not crazy. Someone mentioned unplugged. That sounds nice, but I think you could accommodate this by having maybe a two-tiered noise ordinance.
That's a good point.
Meaning residential versus non-residential?
Yep.
Venues, yeah.
I think that's a great idea. And I think that will only add to the enjoyment of the neighborhood in addition to the vibrancy of the neighborhood as well. So something to explore.
Great. Any other comments or miscellaneous discussion? Okay, if there's nothing else to come before the commission, I declare the meeting adjourned.